Hey guys, tonight you find yourself standing in the dark belly of a medieval bakehouse before the sun has even considered rising, with cold stone under your boots, damp straw prickling through the seams of your hose, and a thin ribbon of smoke clinging to the rafters as if it, too, would rather stay asleep. The air tastes of old ash, wet wool, and yesterday's bread, which is a surprisingly comforting perfume until you remember it also comes with soot in your nose and a draft creeping up your sleeves like an ambitious ghost. Somewhere beyond the shuttered lane, a bell sounds from a monastery tower, slow and hollow through the river mist, while a horse snorts in the winter dark and a cartwheel grumbles over mud outside the wall. Medieval travel brochures really oversold this experience. You stand here anyway, hands already stinging with cold, and you know, with admirable honesty, that you probably would not last a week out here without complaining at least once every 6 breaths. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and do leave a comment with your location and local time, because there is something quietly wonderful about imagining this little candlelit journey reaching you wherever in the world you happen to be. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You do not so much begin the day as continue it from where the fire left off. The bakehouse sleeps, but not deeply. Nothing here ever truly rests. The oven, squatting against the far wall like a patient beast of brick and clay, still holds a breath of yesterday in its belly. Beside it lie split billets of wood, a bent iron peel, wicker baskets, a kneading trough polished by years of flour and weary hands, and one stub of candle pressed into a blob of old tallow on a shelf. You pinch the wick alive and watch the little flame tremble, then steady itself, revealing soot-black rafters overhead and flour dust pale as frost upon the boards. The room has the look of a place that earns its keep before polite people open their eyes. You kneel by the oven mouth and push the ashes with an iron rake. That sound comes first each morning, the dry scrape of metal over stone, the hush of old embers collapsing, the faint crackle from something deep inside that still remembers being aflame. A few red points glow in the dark like watchful eyes. Good, not dead, then merely sulking. This matters more than almost anything else in your small world. If the heat has held through the night, you save wood. If it has not, you spend half the morning feeding the oven like a lord with impossible appetites. Medieval life, you discover quickly, is in large part a relationship with things that demand fuel. Fires, bodies, tempers, rumours. None are cheap to maintain. You fetch kindling from a crate near the wall and lay it gently into the oven's throat, coaxing flame rather than forcing it. Dry twigs first, then split sticks, then heavier wood once the smaller bits catch. Smoke curls low, blue and bitter. Your eyes water, but only a little. A baker who complains about smoke is like a fisherman who objects to water. There is no point. Soon the flame gathers courage and begins to lick the inner dome, throwing orange light across the floor. The warmth arrives in cautious waves, never enough at first, but real. You hold out your hands to it until your fingers loosen. Outside, the world remains almost entirely black. The town sits on the edge of waking, somewhere close by, perhaps in the next lane. A woman coughs behind a door, a dog shakes its ears and tags a chain against wood. Farther off, faint under the bells, the river moves past the wall with that cold, ceaseless whisper only water can manage. You have mud dried on your boots from yesterday and fresh damp already climbing the leather from the floor. Your cloak hangs from a peg. Fur-lined at the collar but long past noble condition, it smells of smoke and wet weather and is, for this reason, a garment of excellent medieval pedigree. You cross to the shutter and lift it a crack. The pre-dawn mist presses close, silver-grey and secretive. The lane outside glistens with old rain, and the ruts are full of water black as ink. Across the way, a stable boy moves like a shadow, leading a horse by the halter. The animal's breath blooms white in the dark. No one speaks. At this hour, the town belongs to those who work before the light bakers, brewers, laundresses, monks, a few cartmen, and the sort of cat that looks as though it has committed several theological errors. You shut the shutter again and return to the oven. Already the room feels changed. Fire makes company where there was none. You feed it more wood, then take up the long-handled brush of bundled twigs and sweep the hearthstones near the mouth. The motions are old, repeated, nearly prayerful. Monastery bells may mark the hours, but in here time is counted by heating, rising, baking, cooling, by ash depth, dough feel, and the colour of crust. No mechanical clock rules you. The oven is your stern and blazing abbot. Some swear that bread baked on a saint's feast day keeps longer if a bit of the old loaf is crumbled into the new dough. Others insist you must never curse while kneading, lest the loaf sulk and flatten like a humiliated hat. No one can quite agree whether this is piety, superstition, or simply the baker's way of explaining a bad batch to angry customers. Still, even the most practical hands keep their own small habits. You do. Before the first full fire catches, you tap the oven arch twice with your knuckles. Not hard. Just enough. A greeting, or a warning, or perhaps an agreement between two labouring creatures. It is foolish, and yet you do not omit it. Near the trough sits yesterday's leaven under a linen cloth, sour, sweet, and alive. You lift the cloth and the smell rises warm and faintly sharp. The smell of something invisible doing faithful work in the dark. Ale balm, flour, water, thyme. Nothing about it looks grand. Medieval miracles rarely do. In a town like this, coarse bread matters as much as law, maybe more. A manor court can judge a theft, a priest can rebuke a sin, but neither can prevent hunger by argument alone. By noon, your loaves will be in the hands of men hauling sacks, women minding kettles, boys running messages, sisters in a small convent by the east gate, and perhaps one or two merchants who will sniff as though bread itself ought to aspire to better breeding. You take a sack of flour from the bench and shift it close to the trough. It is heavier than you would like and exactly as heavy as you expected. That is medieval work in a nutshell, a long acquaintance with things that stubbornly weigh what they weigh. The sack's mouth is tied with cord. You loosen it and dip the scoop in. Fine white flour is for wealthy households and feast loaves, but most of what you handle is darker, rougher meal from rye or maslin, the mixed grain bread of ordinary life. It sustains without flattering anyone. A nobleman may request manchet, pale and soft enough to make a bishop sentimental. Most others eat what fills the belly and asks no questions. As you work, the candle gutters. You shield it with your hand and peer toward the ceiling. Soot feathers the rafters in thick black strokes. Hooks hang there for herbs and sometimes for cured fish, though not today. A spider has chosen one corner for its domain, and glitters briefly in the firelight. Rushes lie scattered over the colder parts of the floor, old ones mixed with fresh. They sweeten the room a little when crushed, though not enough to defeat the ash. In richer halls they say herbs are strewn among the rushes lavender, meadow sweet, sweet flag to improve the air. Here the air improves itself only when a door is opened. Another bell rolls over the town, and this one is answered by a second farther away. The abbey on the hill, perhaps, or the little parish church near the market square. Sound travels strangely before dawn. It seems to drift over roofs and lanes like something poured from a jug. You pause just long enough to listen. Bells order the world. They call men to prayer, merchants to market, mourners to burial, and children to notice that life will continue whether or not they feel equal to it. For you. The bells also say that other fires are being stirred, other hands washed in cold water, other backs bent toward necessity. You pour water from a pitcher into a basin and wash your hands. The water bites with such chill that you hiss through your teeth. A luxury, hot water, a legend, almost. Your knuckles are red, flour caught in the cracks from yesterday. No salve entirely solves that. Goose fat helps. So does beeswax mixed with a bit of rosemary oil if someone can spare it. Some old women swear by a charm spoken over nettle leaves and vinegar, even now. It is hard to tell whether the charm heals the skin or merely convinces you to stop picking at it. From the corner comes a faint snuffling sound. You turn, and there in the half-light sits the dog. Not your dog, obviously. Medieval dogs, like medieval gossip, often belong to everyone and no one. This one is lean, brown, damp around the ears, with the expression of a creature who has suffered greatly from being denied a sausage he has never technically been promised. You have seen him before near the market stalls, under carts, once outside the alehouse studying a bone with professional seriousness. He looks at you now as if he remembers you personally and disapproves of your previous decisions. You again, you murmur. He blinks, curls once on the rushes, and settles as though the matter is decided. Fine. The bakehouse has acquired an inspector. You set more wood into the fire. The oven is drawing well now, sending a stronger draught upward. Warmth thickens in the room. Your shoulders loosen. The black outline of the peel against the wall grows clearer. You check the stack of trenchers, stale loaves baked hard, to be used as edible plates in humbler households, or for soaking gravy at better tables. Nothing in this world wastes willingly. Old bread thickens pottage, feeds dogs, lines bowls, binds forcemeat, or goes to beggars if the day has turned merciful. Fresh bread is comfort. Stale bread is policy. There is quiet pleasure in these first tasks, before customers and voices and haggling. You and the fire, you and the dough yet to be made, you and the stubborn black hour before dawn. The world has not started asking things of you aloud, though it soon will. For now, you can hear the brush of your sleeve, the shift of the dog, the faint spit of sap in burning wood, and the soft clunk of the flour scoop against the trough. You can smell sour leaven, smoke, damp timber, and a trace of last evening's coarse bread. You can feel the cold retreating from your fingertips while it still clings to your boots. Those who tell the tale never fully agree on whether bakers are lucky or doomed. Lucky, because they work with warmth and feed a town. Doomed, because they wake when owls are still considering supper and spend their lives dusted like badly disguised ghosts. You suspect the truth sits politely in the middle. There are worse trades. There are also cleaner ones. At last, when the oven burns steady and the dim edges of dawn begin, almost imperceptibly, to thin the dark behind the shutters, you take a full breath and lay both hands on the rim of the trough. This is the true threshold of morning. Fire has been persuaded. Tools stand ready. Flour waits. Leaven stirs under linen like a thought returning. Outside, bells continue their patient measuring, and the town, still wrapped in mist, leans toward waking. Inside, You stand in ash, candlelight, and growing heat, with a dog by the rushes and the day's first labour before you, ready to begin what must always begin before anyone else can break bread. The warmth from the oven has only just begun to settle into the room, and already the next labour calls for your hands. Fire alone does not make bread, much as the oven might like to take full credit. The dough must still be coaxed into being, and that requires flour, leaven, water, patience, and the peculiar willingness to push your knuckles into something stubborn before the sun is up. In the quiet after the bells, with the dog still pretending not to watch you from the rushes, you draw the trough closer and begin. The first sound is soft, nearly domestic flour falling from the scoop in pale drifts against the wood. It gathers like ground frost, fine enough in places to rise in a little cloud and catch in your nose, rough enough in others to remind you that most grain in this world arrives with a pinion still attached. This is not the airy white flour of a noble wedding loaf, sifted and resifted until it forgets it was once part of a field. This is working flour rye, maslin, some barley ground in with it. Brownish and honest, the sort of meal that keeps a labourer standing through cold weather and an argument with a cart axle. You make a hollow in the mound with your hand and uncover the leaven again. The smell rises up more strongly now that the room is warmer sharp, yeasty, faintly fruity from yesterday's ale balm, with that living edge that suggests unseen things bubbling away at their secret business. Some swear dough can sense a foul temper and will refuse to rise for an angry baker. Others say it is the moon that governs such matters, or the saints, or the weather pressing damp into the timber. No one can quite agree whether bread is a craft, a science, or a long negotiation with invisible creatures no one has words for yet. You only know that leaven kept too cold goes sluggish, leaven kept too warm turns sour beyond kindness, and leaven neglected entirely becomes a tragedy that no amount of prayer improves. You scoop some of the old leaven into the hollow and pour in water from the pitcher, well cold and clear enough to bite your fingers when it splashes. Then a little salt, guarded carefully because salt costs dear, and because a baker who misjudges it becomes memorable for all the wrong reasons. In some towns bread is weighed under strict watch, and fines wait for those whose loaves come up light. The law loves the weight of bread in a way it does not always love the weight of justice. A poor loaf reaches farther into public life than one might think. If the crumb is thin, temper's thin with it. You stir with your hand first, fingers circling through wet and flour, drawing the edges inward. The mixture clings at once, cool and sticky against your skin, then thickens as more meal joins it. Soon the bowl of your palm meets resistance. This is always the beginning of the true effort, the point at which ingredients stop being a collection and become a problem. You brace your feet on the stone, lean your weight forward, and begin to fold. Outside, the town remains hushed, but no longer entirely asleep. You hear a shutter open somewhere down the lane, then shut again with a wooden thump. A cart grinds by slowly enough that you can count the groans in the wheel. A rooster attempts heroism in the distance and sounds unconvinced by his own performance. The dog lifts his head, regards the world with suspicion, and lets it continue without comment. You work the dough with both hands now, pushing it away, folding it back, turning it, pressing again. The trough rocks faintly under the force, your shoulders warm before the rest of you does. Flour streaks your wrists. The dough begins ugly, as most worthwhile things do. It tears, lumps, sticks, resists. Then gradually it learns manners. The shaggy mass smooths. The wetness evens out. Elasticity appears where before there was only complaint. You know better than to rush this stage. A loaf carries the memory of the hand that shaped it. Not sentimentally, perhaps, but physically. Too little kneading and the crumb turns dense as wet plaster. Too much roughness and the structure breaks down. Bread has standards. The candle on the shelf gutters once, then recovers, though it now competes with the oven light and the first faint dilution of darkness at the shutters. Beeswax candles are precious things compared to tallow, burning sweeter and with less stink, but this stub is small, saved from some better evening, and you are glad of it. In grand halls, beeswax may shine before painted saints or beside the carved bed of a merchant's wife. Here it serves a nobler purpose, preventing you from dropping half the flour sack in the dog. You add more meal, then a little more water, working by feel instead of measure. No written receipt guides your hands. A clerk may count rents, a monk may copy Latin, an apothecary may fuss over ounces of dried herb, but bread begins in the fingers. If the dough feels tight, you loosen it. If it slackens too much, you dust in more flour. The weather matters. The grain matters. The age of the leaven matters. Even the temper of the room matters. Though it would be hard to prove that to anyone who does not spend his mornings elbow deep in dough. Some bakers mutter that thunder in the air ruins rising. Some insist a loaf mixed during an argument bakes heavy. Those who tell the tale never fully agree, but almost every old bakehouse has at least one rule no one dares challenge. Yours, inherited from the baker before this one and perhaps from his mother before him, is simple: never leave the trough empty overnight on the feast of Saint Honoré's lesser vigil. Whether Saint Honoré truly notices such things, no one can say. He is the patron saint of bakers in some places, though in others local devotion settles more lovingly on whichever saint once spared the grain stores from mould. Still, the custom persists, if there is no dough in the trough. A scrap of old loaf must be laid there under cloth, so fortune does not mistake the house for abandoned. Foolish, perhaps, yet last autumn, when the rule was forgotten. The next morning's batch split oddly down the side, and a customer found a pebble in his loaf. One event hardly proves the other, but medieval life is built with many beams of best not risk it. You lean harder into the dough and feel it finally answer you. That is the satisfying moment, the one that makes a baker almost philosophical. The mass turns springy and warm from your hands, its surface, once ragged, begins to take on a slight sheen. You fold, press, turn, fold again, until the rhythm becomes nearly hypnotic. Push, fold, quarter turn, push. Your breathing joins it. The scrape of your sleeve over the trough joins it. The small huff from the dog when flour drifts too near his nose joins it. Before long the act itself seems to create silence rather than disturb it. At intervals you pause to flex your fingers. The knuckles ache. Your wrist complain in the way honest tools do after long use. A baker's hands are not elegant things. They chap in winter, crack at the nails, catch flour permanently in their creases, and smell faintly of yeast no matter how fiercely they are washed. Even on feast days they look like hands that could not quite stop working. You rub one thumb against the base of the other palm where the skin is sore, then return to the dough. Bread waits for no vanity. By now a grey wash of morning has touched the inside of the shutters. You can see the grain of the wood more clearly, the iron strap hinges, the chalk marks near the door where weights were once noted and half erased. A half-burned candle from last evening still leans against the shelf, looking as weary as you feel. The callback is not lost on you. Neither is the smell of wet wool from your cloak, hanging where it can steam a little in the growing warmth. Somewhere overhead a board in the loft gives a quiet creak, perhaps from settling timber, Perhaps from mice, perhaps from the spirit of some former apprentice still searching for the loaf he overproofed in 1382. Medieval buildings are generous with unexplained sounds. It saves everyone the trouble of certainty. When the first batch is ready, you divide it with the edge of your hand and set portions aside in bowls dusted with flour. A cloth goes over them to rest. The cloth itself is patched and thin in spots, but clean enough, and that counts for much. Resting dough is a lesson in medieval patience. You can do only so much by force. After that, time must perform its quiet half of the bargain. You begin another batch at once. Bakers do not have the luxury of admiring the first one for long. This second dough is finer, with more wheat flour mixed in, intended for smaller household loaves, and perhaps one better table if the steward sends a boy in time. The texture changes at once beneath your hands, softer, more yielding, almost vain in its pale smoothness. Such loaves are liked for their tenderness and neat crumb, though you privately suspect many rich people prefer white bread because it looks as though no field labour has ever touched it. Even bread can be dressed for status. A trencher on a peasant board is one thing, a manchet beside spiced fish and sugared almonds is another altogether. While you knead, you think in the simple way tired people do not in speeches, only in scraps. Wood enough for the second firing, salt low in the crock. Need to ask the miller whether the last sack ran coarse by intent or insult. Remember the widow near the east gate who pays in onions when coin is thin. Remember the convent sister who always wants the smallest loaf, but thanks you as if it were a reliquary. Remember not to promise anything extra to the suspicious monk if he turns up again. The suspicious monk, you feel, would somehow find fault with the resurrection if the crust were uneven. The dough takes shape. You round it beneath your palms until it sits smooth and taut like something sleeping. Then you cross the top lightly with your thumb, not deeply enough to score, only enough to mark it. Some bakers mark loaves for counting. Some say the sign keeps mischief away from mice, envy, or worse things that travel by night. Even now, it is hard to tell whether such gestures belong more to faith or habit. And perhaps that distinction matters less here than clever men like to pretend. You set this batch to rest as well and cover it. For a little while the bakehouse grows quieter. The trough is scraped clean enough for the next mixing. The fire continues its low, serious roar. A brighter thread of light slips through the shutter crack and lays itself across the floorboards, catching scattered flour so that it glimmers like frost over rushes. The dog rises, circles twice, and stretches in a fashion so luxurious it borders on insult. Then he pads nearer the oven and sits with his tail around his paws, as though supervising the rise. You take the pitcher and drink. The water is still cold, but the room no longer feels hostile. Your body has caught up with the labour. Sweat cools lightly at your neck beneath the wool, and a bit of flour itches near your cheek where you cannot reach it without making matters worse. This, too, is part of the morning the moment after effort, before the next wave begins, when you stand in the company of dough and fire and listen to small signs of a town coming alive beyond your walls. A woman passes outside speaking low to someone you cannot hear. Hooves knock on stones farther up the lane. Another bell sounds, clearer now, as the mist thins and morning commits itself at last. The dough under the cloth will soon swell and soften, taking in the warmth you have worked to make. Then shaping begins, and after that the great test of oven and timing. But not yet, for now, in the candle glow that has not quite surrendered today, with your hands dusted white and your knuckles sore. You stand in that narrow, satisfying pause between mixing and miracle, while the bakehouse breathes around you and the town waits, unknowingly, for bread. The dough rests under its cloths like a row of sleeping thoughts, and for the first time since you woke, the bakehouse allows you a sliver of motion not entirely tied to lifting, pressing, or coaxing flame. It is a narrow freedom. But in a medieval morning, one learns to be grateful for narrow things. The oven still needs watching, of course. Everything still needs watching. Yet the salt crock is low, the water pitcher lighter than is wise, and the little bundle of willow twigs used for sweeping the oven mouth has nearly given up its dignity. So you pull on your cloak, give the dog a look meant to suggest authority, and step into the hour when the town still belongs half to dreams. The door opens with a wooden groan, and the pre-dawn air reaches in at once, sharp enough to make your eyes sting. It smells of wet earth, dung, wood smoke, and river mist, with the faint sour trace of last night's ale spilled outside some nearby door. The lane shines with old rain, mud sits thick in the wheel ruts, and the stones that do show through are slick as eels. You pull the cloak close at the throat and begin down the lane, boots making that soft, resigned medieval sound of leather negotiating with muck. The world is grey, though not yet fully morning grey. The sky over the town wall has begun to pale, but the roofs and chimneys still hold the dark. Smoke rises straight in the cold from a few early hearths, blue against the dim light. Somewhere beyond the houses, a horse stamps and rattles a harness ring. Somewhere nearer, from a narrow upstairs shutter, comes the sleepy cry of an infant. Then the slower murmur of a mother who's been awake too many times for surprise to mean anything now. No one is properly abroad yet except the necessary people. You, certainly, a brewer's boy with an empty cask, 2 women carrying buckets toward the well, a priest with his hood up, moving fast and not looking at anyone, which is often the surest sign that a priest wishes to be noticed for his holiness while pretending otherwise. The bells begin again. They come from the abbey first, heavy and measured, then from the parish church nearer the market square, a little thinner and quicker in tone, as though the smaller bell is eager to prove it matters just as much. Sound hangs over the town in layers. It strikes the wet walls, slips through lanes, drifts over the roofs, and settles in the mist like something visible. Time in your world does not live in a pocket watch or a neat painted clock face. It rolls over you from towers. It calls you to labour, prayer, market, court, burial, feast, alarm. Even those who pretend not to listen, listen. You pass beneath a jutting upper story where rain drips from the beams in slow, regular drops. The timbered house leans so far over the lane that it nearly seems curious about your business. Many of the buildings do. Medieval streets are full of houses that appear to have spent generations inching toward one another in the hope of trading secrets. A cat sits on one sill with its paws tucked under, regarding you with the expression of a minor official who has found paperwork missing. At the turn by the cooper's yard, you nearly walk into the same brown dog from the bakehouse. Of course you do. He stands in the lane looking delighted with himself, tail making a slow curve through the mist. No chain, no collar worth mentioning. Just that solemn little face, damp ears, and the air of someone convinced he has been invited to an important appointment. You stare at him. "I did not bring you," you say quietly. He blinks, which is not the same as agreement. Then he falls into step beside you as though this matter has already been settled by a higher authority. So now you are a baker with a shadow. The town still feels suspended, not dead, not awake, but waiting to remember itself. At the small well near the corner, 2 laundresses stand with their buckets, wool cloaks wrapped tight, steam rising from their breath as they speak in low voices. One of them nods to you, then glances at the dog. "He follows warm trades," she says. "A sensible creature," you answer. She snorts softly, "More sensible than my husband." This is not difficult to imagine, and in any case you have no evidence to the contrary. You draw a bucket for yourself, feeling the rope damp and cold against your palms. The pulley creaks. Water comes up black at first, then silver as it catches the growing light. You fill your pitcher and nod your thanks. Water before sunrise always feels older than it does later in the day, as though it has not yet fully decided to belong to human use. As you lift the pitcher, one of the women touches the little charm tied at her wrist, a bit of red thread, a tiny iron nail, and what might be a sliver of bone or merely a pale bead. For protection, perhaps, against elf shot, fever, envy, or the nameless troubles that seem to drift more freely in the dark hours. Some swear iron turns away wicked things, some prefer rowan wood, some keep dried vervain in the rafters, or tuck Saint Apollonia's name into a whispered prayer when teeth ache. Even now. It is hard to tell where remedy ends and reassurance begins, but few people in a town like this are arrogant enough to refuse either. You continue toward the market square. The streets widen by degrees, and the smell changes as you go. Less stable dung, more wood smoke and wet straw. A fish seller's cart already stands near the square with a cloth thrown over the baskets. The man beside it stamps his feet against the cold and yawns so broadly he could probably swallow a herring whole without further effort. A pair of apprentices haul shutters open on a draper's shop, fighting both the swollen wood and their own sleep. One loses the battle with a spectacular lack of grace and nearly falls backward into a puddle. Heroic, you murmur as you pass. He hears just enough to look offended, which improves your morning more than it should. The market itself is not yet in full cry, but its skeleton is visible. Stalls stand under awnings beaded with damp, hooks, baskets, boards, and trestles wait for goods. The toll post near the entrance leans under its own importance, with the collector's bench beside it still empty for the moment. Later the place will thicken with sellers of onions, leeks, apples, coarse cloth, rush mats, smoked fish, pottery, shoes, candles, ribbons, nails, herbs, and all the small necessities by which daily life keeps pretending to be orderly. For now it is only a square of wet stones and awakening purpose. A pair of monks crosses from the direction of the abbey guest house, sandals hidden beneath their hems, hoods up against the damp. One carries a basket, the other a lantern gone nearly pale with dawn. They move quietly, though not so quietly that you miss the way the shorter one glances toward the fish cart with a look of worldly calculation. Monks, you find, are like everyone else, but with better access to bells and worse opportunities to admit their preferences. And then, because the morning enjoys patterns, you see him the suspicious monk. He is not suspicious in the sense of being accused of anything dramatic. No stolen relic tucked beneath his habit, no poison ring, no secret maps, no choirboy conspiracy. He simply looks at everything people, produce, weather, architecture, dogs with the grave, narrowing scrutiny of a man who expects disappointment and intends to be ready when it arrives. He stands near the toll post with his hands in his sleeves, studying a cart of turnips as if the turnips have made a claim he finds theologically weak. When his gaze shifts to you, it does not warm. Out early, he says. You say that as though the bread bakes itself. You answer. His eyes move toward your pitcher, then the dog, then back to your face. The Lord provides. Yes, you say, though he still seems fond of delegation. For one brief instant. You think you see the monk consider whether he's allowed to laugh before sunrise. He decides against it, a loss for all involved. He inclines his head in that careful clerical way which means both blessing and dismissal might be possible depending on future developments, then moves on toward the square. The dog watches him leave and gives the smallest possible sneeze. Finally, you tell the dog someone with sound judgment. Along one side of the market stands a little shrine set into the wall of a house painted wood behind a tiny iron grate, with a weathered saint inside and a few gutted candle stubs on the ledge. Someone has left a crust there, perhaps as alms, perhaps in thanks, perhaps because once a year an old woman insists the saint helped her granddaughter survive a fever, and now no one wishes to be the one who calls that foolish. Those who tell the tale never fully agree whether the saint is meant to guard merchants, bakers, or travellers, since the original inscription has long since worn away. So the whole town honours the figure in a general spirit of useful caution. This is how many traditions survive through uncertainty combined with politeness. You pause only a moment, enough to bow your head not in deep devotion, perhaps, but in respect for the old habit of not testing what need not be tested. Then you move on toward the saltcellar's corner. He's already there, wrapped in a wool mantle, arranging little sacks and cones of salt under waxed cloth. Salt whitens the air around his goods the way flour does in your bakehouse, though his trade has the sharper smell of sea and marsh. You exchange the few necessary words, the sort that amount to greeting, complaint, and calculation all at once. Salt is weighed, coin changes hands. The price is slightly offensive, which means it is probably fair. You also trade for a small bunch of willow twigs and a stub of resinous pine kindling, the better to persuade reluctant embers. Rode in from the south was slow yesterday, the seller mutters as he ties the bundle. Cartwheel broke near the old shrine, held up half the lane. The one with a cracked saint. The very one. Some swear that shrine protects wagons. Some swear it punishes those who mock it. Even now, it is hard to tell whether broken wheels happen there because the road is cursed or because the road is dreadful. Medieval explanations are practical only about half the time, which is still a very respectable average. With your purchases tucked into the crook of your arm and the filled pitcher balanced carefully, you cross the square once more. The light is stronger now, though still pearled with mist. More shutters open, more smoke rises. Somewhere behind you a woman begins setting out round cheeses beneath a cloth. A boy runs carrying a bundle of rushes and nearly collides with the toll bench. Farther off, from beyond the gate, comes the rumble of an arriving cart. Morning has moved from whisper to murmur. On the way back, you take the lane nearer the wall, where the stones are less crowded and the damp air carries the scent of the river more sharply. Between the houses you glimpse the pale ribbon of water beyond the palisade and the faint shape of frost silvering a patch of field. A pilgrim badge catches your eye on a man's cloak as he trudges past the other way. Scallop shell pinned crookedly, boots caked with travel mud from some long road you do not envy. He nods to you, and you nod back. Pilgrims have the look of people who have discovered that holiness involves an unreasonable amount of blisters. By the time you reach the bakehouse lane again, the world is no longer half dreaming. It is waking in earnest. Voices carry. A cartwheel slaps through mud. A child laughs once, then is hushed. The stable boy you saw earlier is now leading out a second horse. Both animals breathing clouds into the cold. The sky has turned from slate to pearl. Day has arrived, not all at once, but with its usual medieval caution. You push open the door to the bakehouse, and the familiar heat folds around you. Smoke, sour leaven, warm brick, wet wool, and flour. Welcome you back like blunt but reliable old companions. The dog trots in ahead of you as though he has every legal right. The dough under its cloths has risen softly in your absence, rounding upward, alive with hidden work. The oven glows, the tools wait. Outside, the town steps into mourning. Inside, you set down water, salt, and kindling. Shrug off the damp from your cloak and return to the fire just as the day begins asking more of you. The bakehouse receives you again without ceremony, as all dependable places do. Heat presses softly at your face the moment the door shuts behind you, and the scent of warm brick, smoke, sour dough, and damp wool settles around you like a rough familiar cloak. The dog slips past your boots and resumes his chosen post by the oven, with the solemn expression of a creature who believes himself essential to operations. The room has changed in your short absence. Dawn now shows itself properly at the shutters, pale and steady, and beneath the cloths the dough has risen into soft, rounded mounds that seem almost proud of their own quiet success. This is the part of morning that asks not just strength, but judgment. You set the pitcher near the bench, tip the purchased salt into the crock, and lay the willow twigs by the oven brush. Then you stand before the dough for a moment with both hands on your hips, like a commander examining troops who are edible and slightly overconfident. The oven roars low and deep behind you, hot enough now to command respect. Its mouth glows with an orange breath. The iron peel leans against the wall, long-handled and blackened, and the little pine kindling waits in case the fire proves vain and asks for flattery. Everything is ready, which, in medieval life, is always the exact moment something attempts to go wrong. You uncover the first dough and press one finger gently into its surface. The dent rises back slowly. Good. Not too tight, not too slack. The dough has taken the warmth well. You dust the bench with flour, lift the risen mass from the bowl, and it settles into your hands with a living softness that would be unsettling if you were not used to it. Bread before baking has a curious quality, as though it is both matter and promise at once. It clings, yields, stretches. It asks to be handled with confidence and not too much sentiment. You divide the dough into portions with the side of your hand and a small knife, roughing out larger rounds for coarse household loaves, flatter pieces for trenchers, and a few smaller shapes for customers with better coins and fussier expectations. The knife passes through with that satisfying tacky release, and each portion receives a quick turn under your palm, tucked and tightened into shape. Flour dust rises around your wrists. The bench grows white. Outside, a cart rattles past. Inside, the world narrows to weight, balance, and touch. Trencher bread is practical, sturdy, and not especially interested in anyone's approval. It will be baked hard enough to serve as a plate, then soak up broth or gravy until either eaten or given away. Wealthier tables may use them beneath roasted meat and sauces, later passing the soaked trenchers to servants, beggars, or dogs if the household has remembered its conscience that day. Poorer folk, naturally, skip the ceremony and simply eat the bread. Medieval dining is full of little inventions whose elegance depends entirely on how much money stands nearby. You shape the trenchers first, pressing them flatter and broader, pricking a few with the tines of a forked stick so they do not puff too grandly. Then you turn to the round loaves, drawing the skin taut across the top and pinching the seam beneath. A baker learns to read dough like weather. One portion is slightly softer than the others. You dust it and tighten it again. Another has a bubble just under the skin. You press it out with your thumb. Nothing dramatic, only corrections. Bread seldom fails because of one great catastrophe. More often it suffers from 100 little neglects. The finer dough waits beneath its own cloth, pale and almost smug. You uncover it and smile despite yourself. It has risen more elegantly than the coarser batch, as refined things always seem determined to do. You portion it into smaller loaves, some rounded, some gently elongated. One will likely go to a household where servants slice it neatly and place it beside smoked fish or soft cheese on a board scrubbed far cleaner than your bench. Another may end up at the convent near the East Gate, where the sisters eat modestly and thank heaven for even modest softness. Bread travels through every rung of the world while remaining at heart, flour and water made patient. No one can quite agree whether the small cross some bakers mark into a loaf is meant only to bless it, to help it split properly in the heat, or to keep wandering mischief from settling inside the dough. Some swear a loaf marked thus bakes more evenly. Others insist it merely keeps the devil from sitting on the crust. Since both outcomes are desirable, you see no reason to argue. You score a few tops lightly with your knife, not deeply, just enough to guide the expansion. The cuts open the surface like tiny pale smiles. Then comes the oven. You take up the long iron rake and draw out the last of the embers that must not remain where the loaves will sit. They tumble forward in a glittering spill of red, hissing faintly where ash shifts and collapses. With the willow brush dipped lightly in water, you sweep the hearth in quick, practiced strokes. Steam lifts at once, carrying that sharp mineral scent of hot stone meeting wet. The dog, who until now has maintained his post with stoic professionalism, decides this is too much excitement and retreats 3 dignified steps. Wise creature. The inside of the oven gleams with heat, not visibly, perhaps, not like molten metal or a blacksmith's forge, but you feel it as a presence, immense and dry, pushing against your face and brow until your skin tightens. The hairs at your temples seem to shrink from it. This is why the oven is always talked about like an animal, a dragon, a beast, a lord with moods. You do not simply use such heat, you negotiate with it. Too cool, and the loaves pale and harden without spring. Too fierce, and the crust takes revenge before the crumb is ready. There is no clock here to declare the temperature, no polite instrument with numbers to reassure you. There is only experience, the colour of the dome, the speed at which flour tossed upon the stone browns, the way the heat strikes your cheek when you lean near. Some bakers judge by prayer time, others by counting heartbeats, others by the old method of holding a hand near the oven mouth and seeing how long courage lasts. This final technique is not scientific, but it is memorable. You test the heat with a pinch of flour on the hearth. It darkens quickly, but not too quickly. Good. The oven is ready, or close enough that arguing with it would only delay matters. You slide the first trenches onto the peel, their flat rounds trembling slightly as the wood shifts beneath them. The peel itself is polished by years of use, dark with flour and smoke, the handle warm near the base from leaning too close to the oven. You guide the first piece inward and with a sharp little jerk send it gliding onto the hot stone, then another, then another. The motion is one of those things that looks simple only when performed well. Done badly, it folds a loaf in half and ruins your opinion of yourself before breakfast. Once the trenches are in, you begin loading the round loaves around them, arranging each according to size and expected temper. Larger household rounds toward the steadier heat, finer loaves where they may colour beautifully without burning, one stubbornly soft batch a little nearer the mouth where you can rescue it if necessary. Medieval skill often consists of knowing that not everything deserves equal treatment. The oven mouth flashes orange on the underside of the peel. Sweat gathers under your hair despite the morning cold still lingering in the rest of the room. The heat seems to erase everything beyond itself. Bells, market, lane, dog. All of it falls away for a moment. There is only the stone chamber, the loaves vanishing one by one into brightness, and the small gamble each batch always represents. Bread is ordinary only from the outside, from within the labour. It is a miracle conducted under strict supervision. At last the first full loading is done. You step back, lower the peel, and draw a long breath that tastes faintly of scorched flour. The oven mutters softly. Already you can smell the beginning of change-wet dough giving way to warmth. Starch is waking, crust beginning somewhere out of sight. It is one of the best smells in the world, though not yet the richest. That comes later, when the browning deepens and the whole bakehouse seems to inhale bread. You cannot relax, of course. This would be an absurd luxury. Instead, you pace the little strip of floor before the oven, adjusting wood, brushing ash from the bench, checking the remaining dough, turning one smaller loaf that has spread a touch more than you would like. The dog, sensing no crumbs are immediately forthcoming, sighs and rests his muzzle on his paws. Through the shutters, day pushes brighter now, and the sounds outside swell with it, voices in the lane, a door slamming, a wheel striking stone, someone calling for onions as though onions alone stand between civilization and collapse. You prepare the second loading while the first bakes. More rounds, a pair of little household loaves, 2 finer pieces scored with a simple leaf pattern, because a steward's boy once mentioned his mistress liked pretty bread, and apparently this is now a problem that belongs to you. Medieval elegance is often just extra work wearing perfume. Still, your hands oblige. A small twist here, a pinch there, enough to make the tops a little more graceful. Not every loaf needs beauty, but some enjoy the attempt. The scent deepens. Now it comes fully the darkening crust, nutty and rich, mingling with smoke and hot brick until the bakehouse feels less like a workshop and more like the centre of some ancient, benevolent spell. Those who tell the tale never fully agree whether the smell of fresh bread calms the spirit because of memory, hunger, holiness, or simply because even the grumpiest soul has difficulty quarrelling while that aroma hangs in the air. Whatever the reason, it softens you, it softens the room. Even the dog lifts his head and seems briefly prayerful. You take up the peel again and look into the oven. The trenchers are colouring well. One loaf near the back has risen proudly, a little too proudly perhaps, splitting along the score with an almost theatrical flourish. Another remains paler than its neighbour. You rotate them carefully, shifting the hotter side pieces outward, the shy ones inward. Timing here is not neat. Each loaf keeps its own counsel, some brown like eager students, others require coaxing. A baker learns not to take this personally. The first trenchers come out hard and firm, edges darkened, their undersides ringing faintly when tapped. You set them on the rack to cool. Then the larger rounds, one after another, landing with soft thuds and releasing little sighs of steam from their scored tops. Beautiful, in their way plain, crusted, serious. The finer loaves remain a moment longer for colour. You watch them closely, because a well-browned crust is noble, and a burned one is merely a sermon on pride. Outside, full morning has now claimed the town. Inside, the rack fills with bread, steam rises, crust crackles softly as it settles, a tiny whispering sound like paper or dry leaves. You brush flour from one loaf and turn it in your hands, admiring the even bake, the weight, the faint give beneath the crust. This is not vanity, It is relief seasoned with experience. Then, because the day always keeps something in reserve, one smaller loaf slips sideways as you draw it from the peel and bumps the floor. You stare at it. The dog stares at it. There follows a brief silence in which the moral order of the world is examined. You retrieve the loaf before your assistant can make a legal claim. It is only a little marked with ash. Nothing serious. You brush it clean, give the dog a look of grave disappointment, and place the loaf aside for a humbler sale. He accepts the ruling with the pained dignity of a creature convinced corruption has touched the courts. By the time the second loading goes in, the room feels alive with accomplishment. The first bread cools on the rack. The oven still burns true. Light from the shutters strikes the flour on the floor so that it gleams pale against the dark stone. Your shoulders ache. Your face is hot. Your sleeves carry dust up to the elbow. And yet there is satisfaction here too, deep and steady, because the fierce mouth of the oven has been answered properly, and what entered it as soft. Uncertain dough now comes forth as bread, shaped by fire and judgment into something the waking town will soon gather around without ever seeing quite how early, how hot, or how carefully the morning began. The first loaves cool on the rack in a row of quiet triumph, their crusts still ticking softly as trapped steam escapes in tiny whispers. The sound is so faint you might miss it if the rest of the bakehouse were not briefly calm, but you hear it because bakers hear these things. They hear the oven settle, the peel scrape, the sigh a loaf gives when it leaves the heat, and the difference between a customer who is merely hungry and one who's about to become argumentative over weight. Outside. The town has fully entered morning. Inside, you stand among heat, flour, and bread, with your sleeves rolled, your face warmed almost red from the oven mouth, and the very clear knowledge that the day has only begun being demanding. You turn the first round loaf in your hands and inspect it with the unfair scrutiny reserved for things you've made yourself. The crust is good, deep brown but not too dark, with a proper firmness that will soften just enough when cut. The score opened neatly. The weight sits well in the palm. This one will do very nicely for a labourer's table, where it may be torn beside onions, ale, and perhaps a little pottage if fortune has remembered the house. You set it aside with the others in the coarse bread row. Already the bread begins to sort itself into the little hierarchy no one says aloud because everyone knows it too well. Here are the heavier Maslin loaves, brown and sturdy, built for men carrying timber, women hauling water, field hands, coopers, drovers, and anyone whose day requires more endurance than delicacy. Beside them lie the flatter trenchers, practical and unsentimental, destined to hold broth, drippings, beans, or slices of salt fish, then either be eaten at the end or passed along with whatever remains of generosity after the meal. Then the smaller, paler loaves, softer under the crust and finer in grain, for middling households that like to think themselves above rough bread but cannot quite afford the grandest flour every day. And finally, apart from the rest as though they know it, the best pieces, the finer loaves shaped with cleaner hands and better meal, likely meant for a steward's board, a merchant's breakfast, a convent table on a holy day, or the sort of kitchen where servants complain on behalf of people who have never touched a sack of grain in their lives. Bread is democratic only in hunger. In everything else, it tells the truth about rank. You check the second loading in the oven. The finer loaves are taking colour slowly, which suits you. A loaf meant for a wealthy board should come out handsome enough to suggest effort without ever admitting strain. It is rather like certain noblemen. You rotate one toward the hotter side and draw another slightly nearer the mouth. The heat still presses against your face in fierce, dry waves. The dog, having concluded that nothing is currently dropping, stretches with an exaggerated show of indifference and relocates to a patch of sunlight just beginning to reach the floor through the shutter crack. You begin arranging the cooled bread into baskets lined with cloth. Wicker scratches lightly against the bench. A little flour still clings to the rims, pale as frost. You work quickly, but not carelessly, because the morning buyers will come soon enough, and a baker who cannot find his own stock by dawn deserves the panic that follows. One basket for common loaves, one for trenchers, one smaller one for the finer breads, covered more carefully. You reserve a pair of rounds for the convent near the east gate, and another for the widow who pays in onions when coin fails her. Though if anyone asked you directly, you would insist such things are arranged by memory rather than charity. In a town like this, memory and charity often wear one another's cloaks. No one can quite agree whether bread tastes better when sold warm because of actual flavour, or because warm bread convinces people that life is briefly forgivable. Some swear a loaf should never be cut too soon or the crumb turns gummy. Others tear into it at once and call patience a sin. The truth sits somewhere in the middle, as it usually does. But you know very well that once the market air fills with the scent of fresh crust, all scholarly restraint will disappear. The first rule of selling bread is that people become philosophers only until they smell it. You lift one of the better loaves and tap its underside. A good hollow note answers, satisfying. The finer crumb inside will still be a little moist, but in the pleasant way. You imagine it set before some household where a servant slices it on a board while the mistress decides whether today's cheese is acceptable, and the master wonders why everyone seems so slow at prayers. A noble table may receive the best bread, but it rarely improves the conversation. As the second batch nears its finish, another sound arrives through the shutters, the clipped voices of people beginning business in the lane. Someone laughs sharply, then coughs. A boy calls out about eggs. A cartwheel rattles over stones less muddy than the lower lane. The parish bell gives another measured note, and farther off the abbey answers. Bells and bread together are enough to wake nearly any town. One stirs the soul, the other stirs everyone else. You pull the second loading from the oven, and now the rack grows truly handsome. The finer loaves sit among the rougher ones like well-dressed cousins at a family gathering, sharing blood but not quite the same expectations. Their crusts are smoother, their colour more even, their shape a touch more elegant. One bears the little leaf scoring you indulged for a steward's household, and in the slanting morning light it looks almost too pretty to eat. Almost. Medieval beauty, thankfully, is rarely allowed to interfere for long with appetite. You leave the oven door open a little to let the fierce heat ease before the next use. Later there may be room for smaller batches, reheating, perhaps pastries or leftover dough worked into simpler breads if flour allows. But the great labour of the dawn bake is done, and in its place comes the sorting, weighing, and imagining of where all these loaves will end their brief lives. You fetch the scale. It hangs from a peg near the shelf, iron-balanced and practical, the sort of object that gives no comfort whatsoever but prevents arguments from becoming official. Bread, in many towns, is watched closely. The assize of bread, or whatever local rule stands in its place, concerns itself with weight and price in a manner that suggests lawmakers understand hunger very well when it threatens public order. A loaf that comes up too light may bring muttering, fines, or the unlovely attention of the manor court if the complaint reaches the wrong ears. People will forgive many sins before breakfast. Being cheated of bread is not usually one of them. So you weigh the larger loaves, one by one or in expected pairs, adjusting your sense of which baskets will sell at which price. The common bread must be honest. The finer bread must be honest and look reassuringly superior. The trenchers need only be solid enough to survive gravy and judgment. Your hands know the feel of a proper loaf almost before the scale confirms it, but you check anyway. Experience is excellent. Proof is quieter. On the bench by the scale sits the little loaf that touched the floor earlier. You eye it, not ruined, only humbled. It will do for a cheap sale or perhaps for your own meal later, torn into pottage where no one will ask awkward questions. The dog notices you looking at it and raises his head hopefully. Do not start, you tell him. He lowers his head again with elaborate suffering. This is clearly a creature who believes bakery law should contain more loopholes. A shaft of fuller daylight now breaks through the shutter gap and lays itself across the room, touching the flour on the boards, the soot-black edge of the oven, the hanging brush, and the top crusts of the waiting loaves. For a brief moment everything looks almost ceremonial, as if you have not merely baked bread but arranged offerings in some domestic chapel of heat and labour. There is something sacred about daily necessity when seen in the right light, not sacred in the jewelled, relic-covered sense, perhaps, but in the humbler way of hands doing the same required work generation after generation, until the act itself gathers a kind of reverence. Those who tell the tale never fully agree whether medieval people think more constantly about heaven or merely about supper. The honest answer, you suspect, is both. A loaf laid on a board is never only a loaf. It is rent paid in grain, weather endured in the field, grain ground under millstone, wood chopped, fire banked, dough mixed in the dark, and finally this, a warm crust cooling on wicker while the town wakes and reaches toward it. You wrap the better basket with a cloth and tuck it nearer the door where it may be taken first. The coarser breads go into the larger carry basket, which you test with both hands and immediately regret. Wait. Again. Medieval work returns forever to the same principle. If a task looks difficult, it is probably heavier than it appears. You shift the loaves around to balance them. 2 trenchers on one side, 3 rounds to the other. Better. From outside comes the sound of footsteps approaching, then pausing. Someone lingers by the door but does not knock, perhaps only listening. The smell must already be moving down the lane. Fresh bread has a way of announcing itself with more confidence than a herald. You glance toward the shutter and can imagine the mist lifting now, the market square gathering bodies, the toll collector settling himself like a spider at the centre of a web, the fish seller uncovering his baskets, the suspicious monk drifting somewhere nearby in search of doctrinal shortcomings. You tie your apron tighter, brush flour from your sleeves, then discover this has only spread it more artistically. Very well. You are a baker, not a court poet. Flour is not a flaw in this profession, it is a credential. You sweep the bench quickly, cover the remaining dough bits, and stack the empty boards. A few crumbs go into a small bowl. The dog receives one as payment for his unwavering lack of usefulness. He accepts it with more gratitude than certain paying customers will later show for entire loaves. You take a breath and let it out slowly. The bakehouse feels different now from how it felt before sunrise. Then it was a cave of ash, secrecy, and effort, with the fire only just persuaded into life. Now it is productive, brightening, already connected to the town beyond its walls. The oven still glows, but less menacingly. The rack is full. The baskets wait by the door. Warmth rises from bread and stone alike. The smell of crust, grain, and wood smoke clings to everything. If someone entered at this moment with no knowledge of the labour behind it, they might think bread simply appears out of heat and goodwill. It is one of the baker's quietest accomplishments that the hardest part is usually invisible. You lift the large basket with both hands and test its weight once more. Heavy, but manageable. The smaller basket of finer loaves follows. You set them by the threshold in order, ready for labourers, servants, monks, apprentices, and the occasional superior customer who wishes to inspect the crust as if bread has personally sought their approval. There is no time now for rest, only that narrow, satisfying pause in which work has been completed in one form and has not yet begun in the next. Beyond the door, the morning waits with open hands. Inside, among warm loaves sorted for rich and poor alike, you stand in the flower-brightening light and know exactly how much of the town's day will begin with something that passed through your hands before dawn, though by the time they eat it, most of them will never think once of the dark bakehouse, the dragon heat, the sore knuckles, the bells in the mist, or the dog who nearly claimed a loaf by legal ambition. They will simply break bread. And perhaps that is the truest place for your work to end and the next part of the day to begin. You step out of the bakehouse with a basket in each hand, and at once the morning takes hold of you. The warmth from the oven clings to your sleeves and chest for a few blessed moments. But the air beyond the door is still sharp, touched by river damp and the last of the night's chill. The lane has changed since you last crossed it. It is no longer grey and half held in silence. Now it stirs with boots, wheels, voices, and the faint metallic clink of work beginning in earnest. Smoke lifts from chimneys in steady blue threads. A woman beats a rug from an upper doorway, somewhere near the stable yard. A horse protests its harness with a grunt of offended dignity, and all around you, the scent of bread rises from your baskets and goes before you like a small, benevolent conquest. The dog naturally joins the procession. He appears from nowhere and everywhere at once, trotting at your heel with the expression of a creature convinced he's a partner in trade. You glance down at him. "If you start collecting payment, we shall have words," you murmur. He looks up as if to say that his rates are extremely fair. The larger basket digs into your palms through the cloth wrapping. The weight settles into your shoulders at once, not impossible, merely intimate. Medieval work is very fond of reminding the body it exists. You adjust your grip and head toward the market square, where the streets widen and the day begins to gather itself into proper noise. By now the town has become fully visible. The mist has retreated from the lane mouths and sunk nearer the river, leaving the roofs damp and gleaming. Mud still clings in the wheel ruts, but the upper stones are beginning to dry where light reaches them. People move with that determined early pace which suggests they have not yet had time to become disappointed. An apprentice runs past carrying a coil of rope and a face full of urgency. Two women in wool cloaks pass the other way with baskets of eggs tucked close under cloth. A cooper rolls a barrel hoop down the lane with one hand and curses at it with quiet inventiveness. You approve of the effort, if not the theology. At the entrance to the market square sits the toll-post and bench, now occupied. The collector has arrived. He is wrapped in a brown mantle with the hood thrown back, inkhorn at his belt, tally stick on the bench, and the expression of a man who has never once in his life mistaken himself for a source of joy. He watches carts, baskets, bundles, and hopeful faces with patient suspicion. Market tolls, like rain, are rarely loved but often unavoidable. A town can say many beautiful things about trade, community, and fair dealing. But sooner or later someone appears with a stick and a ledger to prove that civic order has expenses. He sees you approach and raises a hand, not in greeting, but in administrative destiny. "Bread again," he says. You resist the temptation to reply, "No, ceremonial paving stones." That is usually what one finds in a baker's basket. He squints into the larger basket, inhaling despite himself as the smell reaches him. Fresh bread is cruelest to those required by duty to pretend indifference. He asks his questions: how many loaves for sale in the square, whether any are spoken for before market, whether the finer basket is for household delivery or open purchase. You answer without haste. This little ritual comes every market day, and arguing only lengthens it. He marks something on his tally stick, then names the toll. You pay in small coin with the inward sigh of a man contributing to the maintenance of roads he would describe, if cornered by truth, as actively theoretical. The collector bites the coin, pockets it, and nods you through as though he has personally granted bread the right to exist. The dog pauses near the bench and studies him with grave distrust, a wise instinct. Beyond the toll post, the market square opens like a waking playhouse. Stalls stand under patched awnings, their boards and trestles now occupied by all the little kingdoms of daily commerce. The fish seller has uncovered his wares, and the smell arrives before the man does salt, river, scales, and determination. Beside him, a woman lays out onions and leeks in tidy heaps, their roots still carrying bits of soil. A cloth merchant shakes open lengths of dyed wool that brighten the grey square with faded blue, russet, mustard, and a red ambitious enough to suggest at least one dishonest promise in the dyeing. A potter arranges bowls and pitchers, tapping one with a fingernail as if the sound alone can persuade customers of its worth. Boys weave through it all with baskets, messages, and spectacular confidence. You make for your usual place near the edge of the square, close enough to passing traffic for the scent to do its work, but not so near the fish stall that your bread must share a reputation with herring. Location matters in market life. Too far from the centre and you are forgotten. Too near the muck and you may as well sell flavoured boots. Your stall is hardly grand, a trestle board set on 2 supports, a cloth, 2 baskets, and the willingness to stand behind them until the loaves vanish. Still, once the cloth is laid and the bread arranged, the effect is persuasive. The coarse rounds go in front, crusts browned and firm, the trenchers stack to one side in a practical row. The finer loaves sit under lighter cloth at the back until needed, because scarcity improves manners and also prices. Bread should look abundant, but not careless. You know this. As you uncover the first basket fully, the smell spreads at once into the cold market air. Heads turn, not dramatically. Medieval people are rarely theatrical before breakfast unless someone has been accused of heresy. But you see noses lift, conversations stall, eyes glance over. The first customers always arrive half by habit and half by scent. A mason's labourer comes first, broad-handed, apron already marked with dust, hair still damp from a hurried wash or perhaps just weather. He buys 1 coarse round and a trencher, counting his coins twice before parting with them. You know his face, though not his name. In a town this size that is normal, most people know one another by trade, gait, and appetite long before names bother entering the arrangement. "Still warm," he says, testing the loaf through the cloth. Has nature an unreasonable effort intended? You answer. He grunts what may be approval and moves on. After him come quicker sales. A serving girl sent from a merchant's house for 2 finer loaves and 4 trenchers. A widow from the lower lane who asks whether yesterday's bread can be had for less and leaves, after some gentle rearranging of dignity, with a good loaf and 1 smaller piece tucked beside it. a pair of apprentices who pool coins for a single round and then spend several moments debating whether to eat it now or retain the fiction of bringing it to their master. Hunger wins, as it usually does. No one can quite agree whether market bread tastes better because it is freshest, because it is bought with the excitement of morning, or because eating in the open air always makes people believe they have earned more than they truly have. You suspect the answer is that warm bread and cold weather improve one another. There is no philosophy more convincing than steam rising from torn crust into winter air. Around you the market grows louder, fuller, more layered. A goose complains from a wicker pen. Someone drops a basket of turnips with a sound like a small blunt disaster. The toll collector coughs in the distance, which carries all the charm of officialdom developing phlegm. A peddler of ribbons sings the names of his colours as if he invented them personally. Two women argue about onion weights with such seriousness that bishops might have envied their command of rhetoric. The bells from the parish church sound again over it all, fainter now against human noise but still present, like a reminder that the day belongs to more than buying and selling, though buying and selling will certainly try their best. Then a familiar hood appears at the far side of your stall. The suspicious monk. He approaches with his usual expression, which suggests that somewhere, perhaps in another town, an ideal loaf exists and all evidence so far points to you not having baked it. His sleeves are folded over his hands against the cold, his sandals, hidden by the hem, nevertheless manage to look censorious. "You're early sold," he says, glancing at the gaps already opening in the front row. "People persist in eating, you reply, it complicates storage." He studies a loaf with care sufficient for relic inspection. This one seems lighter than yesterday's. This one is not yesterday's. The monk pauses, considers, and to your private satisfaction does not immediately find a superior answer. He purchases a small loaf after all, selecting it with the solemnity of a man adopting a philosophical position. As you wrap it, he lowers his voice. "There is talk in the square," he says. "There is always talk in the square. More than usual. This, in market terms, is almost a measurable unit." You hand him the loaf. About what? But he has already slipped sideways into monkish ambiguity. A cart from the South Road. Delayed. Something about the old roadside shrine and a broken axle. Some say a relic was seen. Some say a thief. Some say neither. "Very helpful, you say?" He inclines his head. "I strive to be." The dog, seated by your stall as though hired for presentation, watches him leave with deep suspicion. The monk, for his part, does not acknowledge the animal. This is exactly the kind of mutual distrust upon which civilizations are built. Trade continues. A butcher's boy arrives and tries to charm an extra trencher out of you with a grin so practiced it ought to be licensed. You decline with warmth but firmness. A grandmother with a basket of herbs barters a bundle of dried sage and pennyroyal against the price of 2 stale crusts, which you accept because herbs are useful and because she once cured half the lane of a cough using honey, thyme, and a prayer none of the recipients could later remember correctly. A young woman asks whether the finer loaves contain more wheat than rye, then blushes as though the question were indecent. You reassure her. Bread grain can be a matter of status, digestion, or aspiration, often all 3 before noon. Those who tell the tale never fully agree whether market gossip travels faster by old women, apprentices, monks, or dogs under benches. Having now observed all 4 at close range, you lean toward dogs. People speak freely near an animal they assume does not care. Yet the creature hears everything. By the time the sun reaches the abbey roof, your companion has likely absorbed enough rumour to run a small province. Near mid-morning the square thickens again as more townsfolk emerge from chores and prayers. The air has warmed only slightly, but the crowd generates its own heat of voices, cloaks, tempers, and breath. Coins pass from hand to hand. Bread leaves the baskets. The front row thins quickly. Every sale lightens your load and shortens the distance between labour and relief, though not by much. A market morning may spare your arms the oven peel, but it replaces one discipline with another, smiling without foolishness, guarding the better loaves, judging who truly lacks coin, and never letting a queue of 3 become an excuse for a 4th person to act as if bread should be free because the line offends them. Then comes one of those customers every market breeds a man with decent gloves, a narrow beard, and the air of someone who considers suspicion evidence of intelligence. He picks up a loaf without asking, presses the crust, sniffs it, and says, "This seems smaller." Then what you ask? He looks faintly injured by the request for clarity than a proper loaf. You hold out your hand, then perhaps you would be happier buying an improper one. A woman beside him makes a sound halfway between a cough and a laugh. The man sets the loaf down as though you have failed him personally, then buys it anyway. Market victory takes many forms, and most of them are petty. By the time the bells ring again toward the next hour, your baskets are notably lighter. The trenchers have gone well. The coarse rounds sit in honourable diminishing number. The finer basket is half covered because half of it is no longer there. You flex your fingers beneath the cloth, feel the ache in your palms where wicker bit through on the walk, and breathe in the mingled scents of bread, fish, damp wool, onions, wood smoke, and coins warmed by too many hands. This is the true market smell of morning hunger meeting necessity under open sky. And here, among tolls, gossip, bargaining, and steam still trapped in cooling crusts, you stand behind your bread as the town comes to claim it, one loaf and one small argument at a time. By the time the first real rush of buying eases, the market square has settled into its later morning rhythm, which is noisier than dawn but less frantic than the first scramble for bread. People are no longer arriving with that sharp, hungry urgency of daybreak. Now they linger. They compare prices they have already decided to pay, repeat bits of news they only half believe, and stand in little knots of conversation that somehow manage to block exactly the space everyone else needs. Medieval markets are wonderfully efficient until human beings enter them. Your stall looks changed already. The front row of coarse rounds has thinned to a respectable remnant. Only a few trenchers remain, stacked like patient shields. The finer basket, half covered, still holds enough to attract glances from servants sent on superior errands, but not enough to invite carelessness. This is the pleasant middle stretch of trade, when the heaviest work has been done and the worst of the early bargainings past, leaving room at last for the true occupation of any market square listening. You break a crust from the little humbled loaf, the one that met the bakehouse floor, and therefore, in your private judgment, forfeited its right to lofty society. Its crumb inside is perfectly decent, warm and close-textured, and the smell rises rich enough to draw the dog from under the bench at once. You give him a piece, small but honourable. He accepts it with grave devotion, and lies down again at your feet as though ready to hear state secrets. Which is convenient, because the square is full of them. At the onion stall to your left, the seller leans over her wares speaking to a woman in a cloak patched at both elbows. Their heads draw close, words drift, snagging on the edge of your hearing between the calls of a peddler and the clatter of pottery. South Road. Old Shrine. Wheel broke clean through, so they say. The woman crossing herself does not help the story's credibility, but it improves its market value significantly. A fishwife farther down the row takes up the thread with greater confidence, which usually means less evidence. According to her, the delayed cart from the South Road was carrying something wrapped in cloth and sealed with wax. According to a cooper passing by, it was not cloth but leather, and there were 2 armed men walking beside it. According to a boy who almost certainly heard only 1/3 of what he repeats, a relic was seen glittering in the dawn near the cracked roadside shrine, and a mule refused to pass until holy words were spoken over the axle. No one can quite agree whether the mule's resistance proves sanctity, theft, bad carpentry, or simple mulehood. The last explanation seems strongest to you. A carter stops at your stall for a round loaf and snorts when the matter is mentioned. He has the face of a man whose worldview includes wood grain, harness leather, and limited tolerance for nonsense. Broken axle's no miracle, he says, tucking the loaf under one arm. That stretch of road chews wheels for sport. You have my deepest respect for saying so in a market. You reply. He squints at the onion seller, lowers his voice, and adds, "Still, some swear there was church silver on that cart, or bones." "Which sort of bones?" He shrugs. "The profitable kind." That is often the problem with relics. A saint's finger in a jewelled case may inspire profound reverence, pious reflection, and a remarkably brisk local economy, often in that order. Every town loves holiness in theory, but it loves pilgrims spending coin even more. If a tooth, rib, shred of cloth, or drop of preserved mystery can bring travellers through the gate, then suddenly certainty becomes very popular indeed. Some swear a relic heals fevers, some swear it cures barren fields. Some swear it once made a cow kneel. Those who tell the tale never fully agree, but they always agree on where donations should be placed. You tear another piece from the crust and eat slowly, listening. From the right comes a more familiar voice. The suspicious monk has returned, loaf now absent from his sleeves and expression unsoftened by consumption. He stands near the herb woman's stall regarding a bunch of dried fennel as if it has personally strayed from orthodoxy. "She claims the cart carried a reliquary," says the herb woman, not waiting for him to ask. "Silver chased, bound for the abbey guest house." The monk's mouth tightens. Claims are plentiful. She also claims the wheel burst just as they passed the cracked saint by the road. Wheels burst, and a blue light was seen in the mist. A lantern! No one held a lantern. Then moonlight. It was nearly dawn. Then imagination, he says, with the patient weariness of a man who spends half his life explaining weather to excited peasants. The herb woman smiles without fear. "And yet you came back to ask." This lands so neatly that even you nearly applaud. The monk notices you listening and drifts over, folding his hands into his sleeves. The dog opens one eye and closes it again in professional disapproval. "You hear everything," the monk says. "I sell bread," you answer. "It comes with free education." He glances over the square. There is talk that the cart may stop at the abbey before noon. If it is a relic, the abbot will want the matter quiet until proper inspection. And if it is not a relic, then the matter will still not lack for opinion. This is the most cheerful thing he has said all morning. A servant girl from the merchant's lane interrupts to buy one of the better loaves. While you wrap it, she leans in and whispers as though sharing treason. "My mistress says a thief was found hiding beneath the cart under a horse blanket." "That seems uncomfortable," you say. She says he had no tongue. The monk makes a face so slight it might be mistaken for prayer. "And where," you ask gently, "did your mistress hear this?" The girl pauses, from her cousin. "Excellent," you say. "Then truth is surely only one cousin farther away." She laughs despite herself, pays, and hurries off with the loaf hugged to her chest. The monk gives you a sideways glance that is almost approval. Around the square, the rumours continue to ripen in the sunless air. A ribbon seller claims the cart carried bones of a martyr from overseas. A butcher says it was taxed silver escorted by clerks dressed as pilgrims, which sounds exactly like something a butcher would invent because he has no time for wonder unless it bleeds. An old man near the potter's stall insists that the roadside shrine itself is the cause of all axle trouble because its saint lost a wheel from his own cart in life and resents the living for travelling more comfortably than he did. Even now, it is hard to tell whether this is folklore, mockery, or an attempt to sell someone a safer route. The odd thing is that all of it settles comfortably into the market, as natural as turnips and wet wool. Medieval life does not separate the practical from the marvellous in the tidy way clever scholars sometimes imagine. A woman buying leeks may also wear a charm against elves. A cooper can mock miracles and still cross himself at a roadside shrine. A monk can reject gossip and quietly angle himself nearer its source. You can weigh bread honestly and still tap the oven arch before dawn. Everyone carries 2 baskets, one for what must be done, and one for what might, perhaps, be true. The herb woman returns the favour of earlier conversation by handing you a pinch of dried anise seed wrapped in a scrap of cloth. "For your stomach after too much crust," she says. "I am touched by your faith in my moderation. No one who works beside bread all day believes in moderation." She is correct, which is irritating. You tuck the little packet into your sleeve and glance toward the Abbey Road. No cart yet, only townsfolk moving in and out of the square, cloaks brushing, boots slick with mud, hands full of the ordinary burdens of mourning. A pair of boys chase one another around the well until shouted at by 3 separate adults. A woman at the far end of the market stands beneath a basket of rushes and tells anyone who will listen that blue lights were also seen near the old shrine 12 winters ago, just before a miller's cow birthed a calf with a white star on its brow. This proves nothing, of course, but it sounds satisfying. Those who tell the tale never fully agree on what happened at the roadside shrine because markets do not trade in agreement. They trade in possibility. One story arrives and instantly breeds 6 smaller ones, each with better details and worse evidence. By noon, if left undisturbed, the broken axle may well become a headless pilgrim, a singing reliquary, and a curse on imported mules all at once. A labourer you know by sight pauses to share your crust and shake his head at the noise. My wife says relics are mostly fingers. He says, an alarming number of holy people seem to have gone to heaven in parts. He grunts a laugh through bread. She says if every church with a saint's finger were honest, the blessed dead would need mittens. You nearly choke on your crust. It is an uncommonly fine joke for this hour. And yet, he adds, lowering his voice, my youngest wore a pilgrim badge last winter when the fever was in the lane. Slept with it under her shirt. And the fever took the neighbour first, he says. So who's to say? There it is again, the quiet hinge on which so much of the world turns. Not certainty, not doctrine, simply who's to say? A badge of pewter, a saint in a niche, a whispered charm over nettles, a relic in a cart, a loaf marked with a thumb cross. None of it needs universal agreement to matter. It only needs a place in the long, anxious companionship people keep with hunger, weather, sickness, and hope. Your trade continues as the gossip flows around it. A few more loaves leave the stall. The trenchers dwindle to 2. The dog receives 1 accidental crumb, and thereafter studies every customer with renewed optimism. The suspicious monk departs, only to reappear near the well a few moments later, which confirms your suspicion that he distrusts rumour with the full commitment of a man who intends to hear every word of it. A peddler of tin badges claims he once saw a relic sweat in summer heat. An old woman retorts that all silver sweats in summer heat, and that she has 2 spoons more miraculous than his story. The square approves this judgment. Then, just when the rumour has begun to feel too large and too shapeless to ever become real, a distant sound rolls in from the south road. Not bells, not carts within the market. Something slower, heavier, with the wooden groan of burden and the small irregular clatter of a wheel not entirely happy in its work. Heads begin to turn almost together. The onion seller straightens. The fishwife pauses with knife in hand. The suspicious monk, half visible near a post, stops pretending to browse herbs. Even the dog lifts his head and points his ears toward the road. You cannot yet see the cart from where you stand, only the motion of attention running through the square like wind through rushes. That is enough. One more loaf sells in the space of a heartbeat because apparently rumour improves appetite. You wrap it quickly, pass it over, and find yourself leaning ever so slightly toward the noise with everyone else. There will be time enough to know the truth, or at least the version of it the town chooses by supper. For now, the square holds itself in that delicious medieval balance between bread and story, hunger and wonder, the plain crust in your hand and the possibility of relics coming up the road through damp morning light. And you, behind your stall with a half-eaten crust, flour on your sleeve, and a dog at your feet, listen as the market prepares to greet whatever is coming next. The sound from the south road never quite becomes the revelation the market hopes for, which is perhaps the most medieval outcome possible. By the time the cart edges into view beyond the outer line of stalls, the story has grown so elaborate in everyone's mind that no real wagon could survive the comparison. It comes slowly, one wheel bound with fresh rope where the wood has split, one mule leaning against the traces with the patient misery of a creature accustomed to human plans, and 2 men walking beside it who look less like guardians of miraculous treasure and more like travellers who have slept badly and lost an argument with mud. Still, the square receives them with magnificent suspicion. The cart is covered in a weather-darkened cloth, tied down in haste rather than ceremony. No silver flashes, no blue fire trembles in the morning air, no choir of invisible saints descends onto the onion stall. Yet the broken wheel is real enough, and reality, when it limps properly, often encourages even more invention. Heads turn, hands pause over coins. A boy drops half a bunch of radishes and does not notice. The suspicious monk drifts nearer the edge of the square with the silent efficiency of a man who wishes to appear accidental in his curiosity. Even the toll collector, whose heart is supposed to beat only for lawful fees, straightens on his bench as if miracles too might owe a small amount at entry. You stand behind your stall with one hand on the cloth covering the finer basket and watch the wagon crawl past. One of the men walking beside it wears a leather jerkin darkened by travel and rain. The other has a hood pulled low and keeps glancing toward the Abbey Road, as though hoping the entire market might pretend not to exist. This is hopeless optimism. Markets are built precisely to notice things that would prefer privacy. The mule snorts, tosses its head, and nearly stops when it reaches the uneven stones near the well. This alone is enough to confirm, in the eyes of at least 6 bystanders, that unseen forces are involved. You can feel the story changing shape around you already. The onion seller leans toward your stall. See, I told you there was something odd. You told me there was something wrapped. You say, and is there not? That standard would make every cabbage mysterious. She gives you a look suggesting that sarcasm is a poor substitute for spiritual alertness. Then she crosses herself anyway, just in case wit has overreached. The cart does not halt in the centre of the square, as rumour clearly wishes it would, but trundles past toward the Abbey Guesthouse lane. The suspicious monk peels away after it without a word, moving with more speed than dignity. A few boys try to follow and are recalled by mothers, masters, or common sense, though not always in that order. Within moments, the great object of speculation has vanished beyond the angle of the street, taking its secrets, or its laundry, or its tax silver, or its saintly toe-bone with it. The market exhales all at once and goes back to commerce with renewed enthusiasm, because now everyone has something fresh to discuss while buying onions. You sell the last 2 trenchers almost immediately to a woman from the lower mill who declares she needs them before the whole town starts praying over wheel spokes. She says this in the practical tone of one who has survived too many public excitements to lose the thread of supper. You approve. There is dignity in staying loyal to gravy. A pair of young brothers comes next for a coarse round and a strip of stale crusts, speaking over one another in eager fragments. My uncle says there was a chest, no, a shrine, with silver locks, and the mule would not kneel. Mules do not generally kneel for saints, you say, handing over the bread. The older boy frowns. How do you know? Because if they did, half the clergy would travel by mule and call it revelation. This delights the younger one so thoroughly that he nearly walks into a basket of leeks. He's rescued by his brother, who seems resigned to a lifetime of saving him from produce. As the excitement settles into conversation rather than spectacle, your own body begins to remind you where the morning started. The heat of the bakehouse has long since left your sleeves. The chill that lives in market squares, even after dawn, has found its way back into your fingers. Your shoulders carry the memory of the baskets. Your stomach, having been offered only a noble piece of the floor loaf and a crust besides, begins making quiet but persuasive recommendations. This is the hour when hunger reaches the baker. The first rush has gone. The baskets are much lighter. The finer loaves are down to a respectable few, reserved for late buyers with better coin or poorer timing. Around you, other sellers begin the subtle rearrangement that signals a market crossing into late morning. Goods are pulled closer together, cloths are straightened, faces lose their first brightness and settle into the patient endurance of commerce. Somewhere a child starts crying from fatigue, injustice, or onions. These motives overlap more often than polite society admits. You tuck a cloth over the remaining loaves and step half out from behind the stall, flexing your fingers. The dog rises immediately. Convinced movement must mean opportunity. He follows as you cross to the food sellers near the far side of the square, weaving between a tinker's tray of buckles and a drover with 3 geese, who clearly believe leadership is being squandered on humans. The pottage woman has already done good trade. Her iron pot hangs over a brazier, steam drifting upward with the smell of peas, onion, herbs, and something smoky that may once have been bacon, or may simply have met bacon in a more prosperous season. Beside the pot sits a board of rough wooden bowls and a small stack of spoons that look as though they survived a family argument. The woman herself is broad-faced, apron splashed, cheerful only in the way of people who know exactly how much pepper they can afford and have no time for your feelings. "You look late for breakfast," she says. "I was unreasonably occupied ensuring the town does not collapse. With bread. It is holding for now." She snorts and ladles pottage into a bowl. Thick, greenish, humble, and absolutely perfect. You trade a modest coin and a stale crust for it, then accept a heel of your own bread back from the wrapped bundle at your belt. This is one of the strange circular triumphs of market life. You sell bread all morning and then sit down to eat bread as though the concept remains fresh each time. You find a place near the edge of the square on an upturned cask beside the cooper's yard, where you can watch both your stall and the passing crowd. The dog folds himself at your boots with immediate hope, and after a moment of ceremonial hesitation, you flick him a softened pea from the edge of the bowl. He receives it as if the heavens have vindicated him personally. The first spoonful warms you almost painfully. Pea pottage is not elegant, but elegance is a weak argument against heat and salt. The onions have softened to sweetness. A few threads of herb cling to the surface. The bowl is rough in your hands, the spoon nicked, the steam damp against your face. You eat slowly, because hunger deserves respect and because the square, seen from a seated height, becomes even more interesting. At this hour the market's noises settle into layers, the clack of pottery, the rustle of cloth, the mutter of bargaining, a laugh from the ribbon seller, too smooth to be trusted. The occasional call of a vendor trying to remind the world that apples, herrings, wooden pins, or beeswax are not going to sell themselves, though heaven knows they ought to try harder. Above it all, faint but governing, the bells again. Another hour marked, another slice cut from the day. No one can quite agree whether eating in the market makes food taste better because of the cold air, the nearness of other people, or the relief of sitting down at last. Some swear pea pottage settles the stomach best if eaten standing. Others insist nothing digestible should be consumed within earshot of geese. You suspect both positions were invented by someone with weak knees and a strong opinion. For your part, seated beside a cooper's yard with warm pottage in your hands and a dog at your feet, the meal feels close to luxurious. A brewer's drayman lumbers past, recognises you, and jerks his chin toward the Abbey Lane. Still talking of that cart. Talking more now that it has disappeared, you say, "Best place for a mystery is just out of sight." He nods as though this is doctrine and moves on. Two women settle nearby with bundles of rushes and share their own version of events. One says the cloth on the wagon was stained dark near the back, proof of either old water, lamp oil, or blood, depending on how much excitement one prefers before noon. The other says her cousin's husband once saw a reliquary carried in just such weather, and swore the air smelled of roses. This cart, she admits, smelled more of mule. Even now, it is hard to tell whether disappointment or relief wins that comparison. You finish half the bowl and tear the bread into it, watching the broth soak into the crumb until the edges soften. Stale or coarse bread was made for this. A trencher would have done as well, but there is a quiet comfort in using the loaf itself, letting nothing waste, letting the heat reach deeper into it. Medieval meals are often built on this principle: soften what is hard, warm what is plain, salt what is dull, and call it wisdom, because wisdom is cheaper than spice. By the time your bowl is nearly empty, a little weariness steals into your limbs, not enough to trouble you, only enough to announce that the morning has been long already. Your forearms feel heavy. A dusting of flour still marks one sleeve where market handling has failed to remove the evidence of dawn. The cold has left your knuckles somewhat stiff. You think briefly, with the dreamy absurdity of a tired worker, of a feather bed in a noble guest chamber, warm wine, and someone else rising before sunrise to feed your oven. Then you remember that such people probably still expect hot bread and lose all sympathy for them at once. The dog noses your boot. You offer him the last softened scrap from the bowl. Do not say I never support the idle poor. He swallows it with more gratitude than irony, which is probably healthier. Around the square, the market rolls on. A cart of firewood arrives and causes immediate practical interest. A child in a red cap falls asleep sitting upright against a basket of cabbages while his mother argues over cheese. A leech in a dark gown passes through with a satchel of herbs, jars, and an expression that suggests he would be delighted if everyone became mildly unwell in an orderly fashion. Folk remedies and learned cures coexist here as naturally as mud and cobbles. One woman ties garlic at her belt against bad air. Another pays for powdered willow bark from a man who quotes Galen badly. Both will say they are being sensible. Those who tell the tale never fully agree whether midday tiredness comes from labour, poor sleep, damp weather, or little spirits that creep into your bones when the bells cross the wrong hour. Somewhere, certainly, an old woman has a charm for it involving rosemary, a hot stone, and not speaking to red-haired men before noon. In your case, it comes simply from having been awake while most of the town still dreamed. There is no mystery there, only the honest tax of work. You rise from the cask with the empty bowl in hand and return it to the pottage woman, who grunts acceptance as if gratitude would only slow the ladle. Back at your stall, you uncover the remaining loaves and find that 2 have sold while you were only 10 paces away, paid for honestly and wrapped by the onion seller, who now informs you that she has taken 1 crust as commission. You took payment in my bread. You were absent. I was eating. Then you understand why. This is difficult to argue with. You let the theft stand in the interest of neighbourly diplomacy. The square has moved into its warmer, slower hour now, not warm by any generous measure, but less sharp than dawn. The light has flattened a little under high cloud. Smoke rises thinner. People linger more than they hurry. Your hunger is quieted, your hands steadier again, and the remaining loaves sit waiting for the day's next demands. Around you, trade, gossip, fatigue, and ordinary life continue in their patient tangle. And with the taste of pea pottage and soaked bread still lingering, you stand once more behind your stall, watching the market breathe through the middle of the day. The warmth of the pottage fades quickly once you're standing still again. It leaves behind a pleasant heaviness in your stomach and a less pleasant truth in your shoulders, which now feel every basket you carried before dawn and every loaf you lifted after it. The market has crossed into that slow-breathing stretch of the day when shadows are short, tempers are less sharp, and even the geese look as though they might forgive the world for existing. The bright urgency of morning trade has softened into something more deliberate. People browse instead of lunging. They talk longer before buying. They stand with one hand on a hip and the other on a purse as though commerce were now an issue requiring philosophy. You uncover the remaining loaves and take stock. Not many left, a few coarse rounds, sound and dark-crusted. 3 finer loaves beneath the cloth, still handsome enough to tempt the late respectable. 1 smaller loaf, good but slightly flatter than its brothers, which may yet find a home among the undecided or the thrifty. This is a satisfying stage of the day. Bread mostly sold means labour mostly justified. Yet it is also the hour when other demands begin arriving. The sorts of demands that do not line up neatly with coins on the bench. One comes now, hurrying across the square in the shape of a boy from the manor kitchens. You know him by sight before he reaches the stall. Narrow shoulders, fast feet. The anxious expression common to all household messengers sent by people whose displeasure has more furniture than their own homes. His hood is crooked, one stocking sagging, and he is carrying urgency like an invisible basket. You, he says, slightly out of breath, as if there were a chance you'd become a fish seller in the last quarter hour. The steward wants finer loaves. An admirable ambition. You answer, how many? He glances behind him toward the lane leading up toward the manor house and lower keep. 4. You lift the cloth and let the truth present itself. Then the steward wants one more loaf than presently exists on this board. The boy stares as if this is a moral failure on your part. For supper, he asks. For all I know. For juggling, you say. I still have 3 good ones. If he wants 4, he should have remembered that bakers begin before dawn, not after his cook starts shouting. The boy makes the unhappy face of someone accustomed to being the lowest rung in every conversation. He said there may be guests. This explains much. Noble households can ignore ordinary needs indefinitely, then discover hospitality all at once like a thunderclap. Somewhere at the manor, no doubt. Someone has just remembered that guests prefer bread to notional abundance. You picture the kitchen there, spits turning, knives thudding, servants moving in purposeful misery, a cook with forearms like table legs demanding trenchers, herbs, onions, vinegar, and human obedience in equal measure. You look again at your remaining stock, 3 finer loaves, the flatter small loaf, and, back in the bakehouse, perhaps enough dough scraps or flour to attempt another modest batch if the oven's heat has held kindly. It is not ideal. Medieval life rarely is, but supplying the manor matters, not because the Lord will starve without you. Lords have a supernatural gift for arranging not to starve. It matters because a household with coin, rank, and long memory is best kept satisfied when possible. Manor demands have a way of reappearing later as taxes, favours, regulations, or one particular tiresome steward standing in your doorway pretending to be reasonable. I can give you these 3 now, you say, tapping the better loaves, and I can see what may yet be drawn from the bakehouse for a 4th by late afternoon. The boy brightens with the speed of the desperate. He'll want them even if they're small. Comforting. Tell him smaller bread still counts as bread in Christian lands. He does not laugh. A pity. He pays in the clipped, efficient way of the household money, no haggling, no warmth, only duty, and takes the 3 wrapped loaves against his chest. Before he goes, he adds, the steward said proper weight. Then the steward may rest tonight in the arms of certainty. The boy hurries off, half stumbling over a rut, and vanishes toward the manor lane with your finest remaining bread. You watch him go and feel the next part of the day rearrange itself at once. So much for drifting gently toward evening. Now you will need to return to the bakehouse sooner than expected. Judge the oven, gather what flour remains, and see whether one more decent loaf or perhaps several smaller ones may be persuaded into existence before Vespers. This, too, is part of the baker's life, not just baking what was planned, but answering what the world suddenly decides it has always required. The onion seller leans toward you from her stall where the produce has visibly diminished and her mood has visibly improved. Manor wants more. Apparently guests have been discovered. That is serious. Guests eat like moral lessons. You nod and complain more elegantly. She laughs, then lowers her voice. Old Marta said the cart by the Abbey Lane truly did carry something for the guest house. Not a relic, maybe, but important enough that the cellarer himself came out. Old Marta also once claimed a rooster predicted hail, and it hailed. A rooster makes many predictions, you say. One of them is bound to age well. Still, the thought stays with you. The cart, the Abbey guest house, something important enough for officials to meet it. Market rumours have mostly settled now into separate camps relic, tax silver, private household goods, or plain disappointment. No one can quite agree whether the covered cargo matters spiritually, politically, or only to the 2 miserable men who had to drag it over broken road. But in a town like this, the Abbey, the manor, and the market are all tied by invisible cords. Tug one, and the others feel it. A woman in a fur-lined hood appears at your stall next, looking over the remaining bread with careful eyes. She is not noble, but she serves someone who lives closer to carved chairs than you do. One can always tell. Her cloak is good wool, her gloves mended with skill rather than desperation, and she inspects loaves not like a hungry person, but like someone who may be judged for the quality of what she carries home. "You've only common rounds left," she asks. "Common and virtuous, you say?" She gives you the faintest smile. "My mistress prefers lighter bread. So does everyone who does not have to grow the grain." This earns you a fuller smile, almost dangerous in its suddenness. She buys the flattest of the remaining better loaves anyway and asks, not casually enough, whether the manor has already taken the rest. News moves quickly in market air. You answer with suitable vagueness. She leaves satisfied or dissatisfied. It is hard to tell, which likely means she works for wealthy people. By now the square is growing less crowded. Some sellers have begun packing what remains. The fish stall is emptier, though not emptier in smell. The ribbon man has lost some of his songs and gained a blanket around his shoulders. Children drag their feet with that peculiar noon and after exhaustion that makes them look ancient and unreasonable at once. A pair of pilgrims comes through from the south gate, badges clinking softly on their cloaks one scallop shell. One pewter saint's face rubbed nearly smooth. They buy half a loaf between them and ask the way to the abbey guest house. That catches your ear. "Is there lodging there today?" one asks. "There is usually lodging," you say, unless holiness is overbooked. The older pilgrim smiles. "We heard there may be some special object come in." Of course they have. A rumour travels faster than any pilgrim road, faster than prayer some days. "Then perhaps you'll arrive in time to be disappointed firsthand," you say. He laughs, accepts the bread, and moves on with his companion. Their boots are caked with road mud, their cloaks worn nearly to memory, and the small badges at their shoulders gleam faintly. Pilgrim badges are curious things, part proof, part protection, part souvenir, part boast. Some wear them for devotion, some for status, some because they think a saint who has seen your chest at close range may be more likely to notice your fever later. Those who tell the tale never fully agree whether holy travel changes the soul or merely rearranges the blisters. Likely both. You begin tying cloth over the remaining coarse loaves, preparing to close the stall earlier than expected. The manor's request presses at the back of your thoughts. Flour left enough, perhaps, for a small batch. Leaven. There should be some. The oven heat. That is the true question. Ovens, like clerics and weather, do not always stay in the mood promised by the morning. If the stones are holding, you may yet shape a few neat loaves. If not, then more wood, more waiting. And the whole rhythm of the day shifts under your feet. A cooper comes by for the last full course round. He pays in good coin and an opinion. "Heard the reeve may be riding up to the abbey," he says. "For bread, you ask? For whatever made those monks stop pretending not to care?" This is fair. Monks who stop pretending not to care are often the best heralds of actual significance. Once the cooper leaves, only one small loaf remains on your board. You pick it up, weigh it in your hand, and decide it will go to the widow by the East Lane if she's not already eaten worse. The dog watches with quiet hope. "This one is not for you. You tell him." He blinks with tragic composure. The man could teach courtiers. The onion seller is bundling the last of her produce when she says, "You'll be going back. Then. To the bakehouse. For the manor. For whoever has coin, appetite, and poor timing." She nods sympathetically. At least they pay. Most tyrannies do, when they want seconds. You both look toward the hill lane where the manor sits above the town, its walls and timber halls just visible beyond roofs and smoke. Manners are strange presences, distant yet always nearby in consequence. Even here in the square, where commerce belongs more to townsfolk and guild men than to ploughlands and courts, the manor reaches in through dues, custom, orders, and appetite. A lord need never touch flour to influence how much a loaf weighs. You pack your stall at last, cloth folded, board lifted, empty basket stacked inside larger one, the last small loaf wrapped aside. Your fingers are stiffer now than they were by the oven, and the sky has shifted into that pale afternoon brightness that never quite warms in the cold season. Market noise is thinned to patches rather than waves. Somewhere far off a hammer rings. Somewhere nearer a baby wails and is answered by a woman who has clearly had enough of all earthly things before dinner. As you lift the baskets, you feel again the old truth: labour does not end neatly. It bends, changes shape, asks another favour, and waits by the door while you finish the first one. Bread sold in the market becomes bread demanded by the manor. Dawn effort becomes afternoon obligation. Your whole day is a long conversation with hunger conducted through flour. The dog rises with you, of course. You are not coming into household negotiations, you mutter. He falls into step anyway. And so, with the market thinning behind you, rumours still drifting about abbey cargo and broken axles, and the manor's late appetite now pulling you uphill through the next labour, you leave the square carrying empty baskets and a full sense that the day is not done shaping you yet. You leave the market square with the empty baskets nested together on one arm and the wrapped little loaf tucked beneath the other, and at once the town feels changed again. It is no longer the eager, noisy morning that greeted your stall. That version of the day has spent itself. Now the light lies flatter across the lanes, pale and a little tired, and the wind has found a way in from the river that carries damp cold under your cloak no matter how firmly you pull it shut. Market cries still rise behind you, but softer now, scattered rather than swelling. The square is closing itself by degrees. Stalls are being stripped down, boards lifted, cloths folded, unsold goods counted, regretted, or reimagined for tomorrow. Ahead of you, the lane toward the bakehouse bends between leaning timber houses, then climbs slightly toward the gatehouse road that leads on to both abbey and manor. You mean to return straight home, judge the oven, and see what the stones will grant you before the steward begins sending boys with tragic faces again. But weather, like nobility, often assumes it deserves first claim on your plans. The sky has been threatening indecision all afternoon. Now it makes up its mind. The first drops are large and cold, smacking dark spots into the dust and stone, tapping the basket rim, flattening the little flour ghosts still clinging to your sleeve. They arrive sparsely at first, exploratory, like messengers checking whether the world is still outside. Then more follow. Not a storm. Nothing dramatic enough to frighten livestock or inspire sermons. Just a steady grey rain, the sort that can soak a man thoroughly while remaining too polite to admit it has done so. You glance upward. The clouds are low and woolly, the colour of old pewter. Very well. So the day intends to become wetter before it becomes kinder. The dog, who has until now accompanied you with the composed step of a minor official, stops in the lane and looks up at the sky with betrayed astonishment. Rain, apparently, was not included in his contract. You continue on, because bread, stewards, and ovens do not halt for canine grievances. But when the rain sharpens a little, and the wind slides it sideways under the eaves, even you decide not to pretend a heroism where shelter is 5 doors away. The gatehouse lies nearest. It is not the main gate of the town, grand enough for processions and alarms, but a smaller covered passage by one of the inner lanes where carts sometimes wait to be checked, and travellers stand out of weather while officials decide whether their bundles require taxation, suspicion, or both. The roof is low, the stone damp, the wooden doors banded with iron so old it has turned nearly black. Under the archway the air smells of wet timber, horse leather, and that cold mineral scent stone gives off in rain. You step beneath it and feel at once the small, profound pleasure of not being rained on. Several others have had the same idea. A woman with a basket of rushes stands near the wall, shaking droplets from her hood. A young carter crouches by the wheel of a handcart covered with sacking. Two pilgrims, the same pair you saw crossing the market earlier, occupy a bench beneath the inner wall, cloaks damp and boots muddy to the ankle, and by the outer post, talking to one of the gate guards with all the expression of a man arguing gently with fate, stands the suspicious monk. Of course he does. Rain has turned the edges of his habit dark, and the hem is spattered with mud. Yet he still manages to look as though the weather has committed a doctrinal error. The guard, wrapped in a patched surcoat and holding a spear with the bored intimacy of long practice, listens with one eyebrow slightly raised. Not saying it is a relic. The monk is saying as you arrive, only that the abbey has asked for discretion. The guard shifts his spear. Everything asks for discretion once it comes through a gate. He notices you then, and gives the sort of nod guards specialise in brief, not unfriendly, but calibrated to reveal nothing about his opinion of you, your bread, or your tax compliance. Rain drove the market in, he asks. Only the sensible pieces of it, you answer. The suspicious monk turns, sees you, and seems to regret at once that conversation now has an audience. You collect circumstances, he says. I sell bread, you reply. Circumstances arrive free. The pilgrims on the bench laugh quietly. Their damp cloaks steam a little in the shelter, and the pewter badges at their shoulders catch what little light reaches under the arch. One badge bears a scallop shell, the other, a tiny mounted saint worn soft by fingers. They look tired in the long roadway, faces thinned by weather, hands chapped, eyes used to sleeping wherever walls or kindness permit. Rain has flattened their hoods, and one holds his boots a little away from the bench as if out of courtesy to the wood. Any word from the abbey, asks the older pilgrim, directing the question at the monk. The monk folds his hands into his sleeves, only that the guest house is full for the moment. Full with holiness, asks the younger pilgrim hopefully. Full with concern, says the monk. That is a very monkish answer, which means it clarifies nothing and sounds important doing it. Rain drums lightly on the gatehouse roof. Beyond the archway the lane has already darkened, turning the ruts to slick brown channels and deepening the smell of earth. Somewhere outside the shelter a horse stamps and jingles harness. Water slips from the eaves in a thin, steady curtain. Inside, everyone performs that subtle medieval ritual of wading through weather-shifting weight from one foot to the other, pulling cloak edges tighter, looking outward as though intensity of gaze might shorten the rain. You set the baskets down and rub your hands together for warmth. The wrapped little loaf remains tucked beneath your arm, still intended for the widow by the east lane if the world permits. The dog shakes himself once just beyond the arch, then edges under cover and sits with the damp dignity of a creature who feels weather should apologize. The rush seller beside the wall glances at the monk and says, "So it is something, then." "It is always something," the monk says. That is not the same as saying what. He does not answer, which is a kind of answer in itself. No one can quite agree whether monks are naturally secretive or simply learn, after enough years in cloisters, that speaking plainly encourages more people than silence does. Some swear the abbey keeps knowledge tucked away like winter apples. Others insist monks gossip worse than fishwives, but in longer sentences. Watching this one now, you suspect both are true, depending on the hour and the weather. The guard shifts his stance and says, "Cart came through not long ago. 2 men with papers, wheel lashed up with rope, 1 chest under the canvas." "A chest," says the younger pilgrim, sitting straighter. "1 chest," says the guard, "and a clerk wet enough to pass for a saint if wrung out over the right altar." The older pilgrim smiles into his cloak, sealed, with wax. The rush seller crosses herself, not dramatically, just enough to keep options open. Relics come sealed. "So do tax records," says the guard. This is the strongest thing anyone has said all day. Even now, it is hard to tell whether the greater mystery in a medieval town is holy matter or paperwork. Both travel under guard, both make officials anxious, and both can ruin a man's week. The rain continues while these possibilities hang in the archway air like smoke. The younger pilgrim leans forward. "We heard there was a blue light at the roadside shrine." The guard snorts. "You heard rain on lantern glass in morning mist." The monk says nothing, which gives the legend another inch of life. Those who tell the tale never fully agree what was seen near the old cracked shrine by the south road. Some say a light, some say only wet air catching first dawn. Some say mules know what men do not, and the animal balked from reverence. Others say the axle broke because that road has eaten wheels since the year your grandfather stopped believing repairs could be permanent. Yet once a story begins its pilgrimage, truth rarely catches it before supper. You listen while the rain thickens for a short spell, pattering harder on the roof and sending a faint spray inward through the open side of the arch. The dog retreats another 2 inches. The guard pulls his mantle higher. The rush seller mutters that she should have covered her bundle better. One pilgrim begins rubbing his hands and softly reciting what might be a psalm, or simply the list of places he has already walked through, in a gatehouse. With stone at your back and weather at the threshold, time becomes oddly suspended. The world cannot move forward until the rain relaxes, so everyone leans instead into story. The suspicious monk, perhaps against his own better judgment, lowers his voice a fraction. There is also talk. He says that the chest is not for public veneration at all. The younger pilgrim nearly glows. Then what? "A document," says the monk. This lands like a loaf dropped from a cart. The rush seller looks offended. The guard looks vindicated. You bite back a smile. The older pilgrim sighs as if a small but beloved illusion has just gone to confession. "A document," says the younger one. "All this over writing." The monk draws himself up slightly. Writing governs souls, lands, privileges, rents, rights, obligations, memory, and law. "Yes," says the guard, "but it does not generally make mules balk in dawn mist." The monk presses his lips together. There may be more than one matter involved. Ah, there it is. The tiny widening in the story. Not relic or document, not holy or administrative, possibly both. A sealed chest, an abbey request for discretion, a clerk in a cart, perhaps a written grant, perhaps an inventory, perhaps a relic wrapped with records proving its transfer. In a medieval world, parchment often travels beside bone with mutual importance. Saints need signatures almost as much as sinners do. You think suddenly of the manor boy and his urgent request for finer loaves. Guests at the manor, something sealed arriving at the abbey, possible movement between guest house and hall. It would not be strange. Important men dine, pray, and negotiate in the same damp weather as everyone else, only with better cloaks and cleaner cups. The rain begins to soften at last. easing from a steady curtain to a quieter drip from the eaves. Outside, the lane glistens. Water runs along the stones in little channels, carrying straw, mud, and one floating feather toward the lower drain. The light has dimmed under the cloud, though not yet enough for evening, more a wet afternoon hush than true decline. The guard nods toward the open lane. That will be your chance. The rush seller gathers her basket. The pilgrims stand and resettle their cloaks, already planning whether Abbey disappointment is still worth pursuing. The suspicious monk gives them a look that suggests both warning and surrender. He cannot stop them, and perhaps he knows the guest house will reveal exactly as much as it intends, and not a crumb more. You lift your baskets again. The wrapped loaf is still dry. Good. The widow will not receive a sponge disguised as charity. The dog rises too, having decided that if movement is possible, loyalty should appear effortless. As you step out from the gatehouse into the wet lane, the monk says behind you, if you pass the Abbey road, keep to the stones. The cart ruts are deeper now. A practical blessing, you say without turning. He does not answer, but you can feel his disapproval following you like incense that has learned sarcasm. The lane shines ahead, dark and slick. The air is colder after rain, cleaner too, with washed earth, wet timber, and chimney smoke drifting down under the clouds. Somewhere a bell sounds from the Abbey, gentler now through the damp, and the whole town seems briefly hushed beneath it. You pull the cloak closer, shift the baskets on your arm, and head on toward the bakehouse, and whatever late labour the manor's appetite and the day's mysteries still intend to draw from you. The rain leaves the town darker than the hour deserves. Not night. Not yet. But that wet, dimmed kind of late afternoon when every board, roof, and stone seems to have absorbed a little extra shadow. The lane back to the bakehouse glistens under your boots. Water gathers in the wheel ruts and reflects a bruised strip of sky between the leaning houses. Smoke no longer rises cleanly from chimneys but drifts low and damp, carrying the smell of peat, wood, boiled cabbage, and the first preparations of evening meals. Somewhere ahead a child is being called indoors with the tone that means the call is not entirely optional. Somewhere behind you, from the Abbey quarter, a bell reaches out through the wet air and hangs there a moment before dissolving into the roofs. You keep to the stones where you can... The suspicious monk's warning about the cart ruts proves annoyingly useful. The mud along the lower side of the lane has deepened into that rich, adhesive sort, which makes every step feel like a debate. The baskets knock softly against your leg as you walk. The dog, having resumed his place in your affairs without formal appointment, picks a delicate path around puddles for exactly 3 strides before surrendering to damp inevitability. At the east lane you stop long enough to leave the wrapped small loaf with the widow. Her door opens only a hand's breadth at first, then wider when she recognizes you. Warmth spills out in a little breath smelling of onions, smoke, and old wool blankets drying near a hearth. She's wrapped in 2 shawls and looks, as always, both frail and unconquerable. "You are late," she says. "I was delayed by weather, markets, mystery, and the manor's appetite. Then you have had a normal day. There is no arguing with this. You hand over the loaf." She presses 2 small onions and a twist of dried thyme into your palm with the swift authority of someone refusing charity by turning it immediately into exchange. "Take it," she says. "My niece brought too much thyme from the riverbank, and onions do not improve by philosophy." You incline your head, tuck the onions away, and step back into the lane before she can produce any further honesty. The dog sniffs hopefully at the threshold. The widow looks down at him and says, "That one has the face of a tax collector." This may be the cruelest assessment he has yet received, and also the funniest. He sneezes as if in protest. By the time you reach the bakehouse, the air has turned colder under the wet. The door sticks slightly in its frame from the damp, then gives way with a familiar wooden groan. Inside, the room greets you with old warmth, cooled somewhat but not lost. The oven still holds heat, not the fierce dragon breath of dawn, no, but a good inward warmth in the bricks, the kind a baker feels with hope before touching a single tool. The room smells of ash, baked crust, wet cloak, and the lingering sweetness of earlier loaves. To you, it is nearly luxurious. You set the baskets down and go straight to the oven. The stones answer well. When you open the mouth and lean near, dry heat brushes your face, steady if gentler than before. Good. Not enough for a full great bake, perhaps, but enough for smaller loaves if coaxed with fresh wood and patience. That is all the manna can expect after sending its need halfway into the afternoon like an afterthought dressed in authority. You add split sticks first, then heavier pieces, building the fire carefully rather than greedily. Flames climb with a little reluctance, then settle into the inner curve of the dome. The old ash shifts at the edges. Smoke pulls up and out. Your hands remember the motions even while the rest of you longs, briefly and uselessly, to sit by the wall and let someone else negotiate with heat. But bread does not appear out of longing. Bread, like rent and weather, requires attendance. The dog circles twice on the rushes and lies down with a sigh so deep it seems intended to imply equal fatigue. This is not persuasive. He has contributed chiefly moral presence and crumb disposal. Still, there is companionship in having another living thing in the room while evening gathers outside. You take stock of what remains. Flour, enough for a modest batch. Leaven, a portion still alive beneath cloth. Water, yes. Salt, yes. And dough scraps from earlier, resting cool in the bowl, which may be worked into the new batch if handled kindly. Some bakers swear a bit of yesterday strengthens today, and a bit of morning strengthens evening. Others say old dough gives character. This is a charitable word for sourness when used by cooks and wisdom when used by bakers. No one can quite agree whether second baking always produces better crust or merely a more grateful customer. But in a town settling towards supper, gratitude is rarely a weakness. You mix quickly now, not carelessly, but with the economy of a body that has already performed this labour once in darkness. Flour into the trough, leaven loosened with water, salt pinched between tired fingers, the scraps folded in. The dough comes together more stubbornly than the morning batch, perhaps from the cooler room, perhaps from your own heavier hands. You knead it with shoulders already acquainted with ache. Push, fold, turn, push, fold, turn. Outside, wheels hiss through wet lanes. Inside, your breath and the creak of the trough mark time until the parish bells do it for you. They come from the church near the square, softer through damp air than at dawn, but somehow broader in feeling. Evening bells always seem less like commands and more like gathering. They draw people inward toward hearths, prayers, bowls, benches, stable doors, shutters, and all the little closing rituals that protect a household from the dark. Vespers for some, supper for all. Even those who do not say the hours feel them in the bones. The town folds under bells the way cloth folds under careful hands. You pause for half a breath to listen. Beyond the walls, evening is beginning in hundreds of rooms you will never see. Pottage stirred over low fires, wet boots pulled off near doors, a child washed by force and complaint, ale drawn, rushes shifted on floors, A hen carried in from the yard because foxes and saints alike cannot be trusted entirely after sunset. Somewhere a woman mends by dim light. Somewhere a man counts poor coins and worse prospects. Somewhere a clerk opens a sealed chest in an abbey room and finds either parchment, relics, or the kind of disappointment that still manages to sound important when described in Latin. You return to the dough. Those who tell the tale never fully agree whether evening weariness makes bread heavier because the baker is tired, or better, because the baker has stopped pretending the day can be improved by haste. There is a steadier quality to this batch, less ambition, more acceptance. Your hands shape smaller loaves fit for late sale or urgent household need, perhaps one slightly finer round for the manor if the crust behaves nobly enough, and several plain pieces for whoever still comes knocking after the square has emptied. The oven, once fed again, wakes kindly. You clear the hearth, sweep the stones, and test the heat with a pinch of flour. It browns well. Good enough. More than good enough for the hour and the circumstances. You slide in the first of the little loaves and feel the dry heat kiss your knuckles as the peel withdraws. Evening bread goes into the oven while the town breathes smoke. That smell arrives not long after the first soft bloom of baking crust rising into the room and out through the cracks around the shutter and door. Fresh bread at dusk has a different character from bread at dawn. Morning bread promises labour and beginnings. Evening bread promises shelter. It smells less like command and more like pardon. The effect is immediate. Before the first batch is fully coloured, there comes a knock at the door, not the heavy, offended rap of authority, a quick, hopeful one. You open it to find a cooper's wife from the lower lane, cloak damp at the hem, basket on her arm, hair escaping under her scarf. "I smelled it," she says by way of greeting. As intended. "Have you any left?" "Have you coin?" She lifts 2 fingers and a bit of cheese. This is a respectable beginning to any negotiation. You sell her 2 small loaves while they're still warm enough to steam through the cloth, and she leaves with the look of someone carrying peace talks home. After her comes a potboy from an alehouse near the market, sent for whatever remains because a cartman has stayed later than expected and now requires bread to absorb his virtues. Then a girl from the draper's lane wanting 1 round before father decides we can do without. Then, to your faint astonishment, the manor boy returns same crooked hood, same expression of hereditary urgency. Steward asks whether there is 1 more. "You mean there is suddenly 1 less guest than expected?" He says 1 larger loaf would mend matters. Then the steward should marry a baker. The boy, poor soul, is too tired even to look scandalized. You hand him the best of the evening batch, a smaller fine round. Yes, but well shaped and evenly browned. Good enough to mend matters, or at least postpone blame. He pays and vanishes uphill again, carrying your second rescue of aristocratic planning. Outside, the bells sound once more, and now the whole town seems to answer. Doors close, voices lower, supper smoke thickens in the lanes, each chimney adding its thread to the evening air. Through the shutter crack you glimpse a wash of dim gold where the sky is open just a little under the cloud, enough to catch the wet stones and make them shine. A cart rolls slowly home somewhere beyond the bakehouse wall. A church door thumps shut. Someone laughs in the lane, then coughs, then laughs again because coughing has become most of everyone's winter music. Inside, the little loaves cool on the rack, their crusts settle with faint ticks and whispers. You count what remains, not much, enough for 1 last neighbour, perhaps 2, and something for yourself besides. The room is warm now in the richest way, not blazing but companionable. The sort of warmth that clings to stone after a good day's work. Flour drifts pale on the bench. The onions from the widow sit near the knife. The dried thyme waits beside them, sharp and clean-smelling. The dog has moved closer to the rack in a calculated posture of innocence. Even now, it is hard to tell whether the truest heart of a medieval town lies in its church bells, its manor hall, its market square, or rooms like this one, where labour turns into food while the light goes down. Perhaps it lies in all of them at once. Perhaps that is why the bells sound so different at evening, because they pass over everything equally abbey wall, wet lane, noble chamber, common hearth, and bakehouse floor. You stand by the oven with your sleeves powdered white, your hands aching pleasantly now that the last urgent kneading is done, and listen as the town closes itself around supper, smoke, and prayer. The late loaves are baked. The last sails go out into the damp. The day has not finished with you entirely, but it has begun, at last, to loosen its grip. By the time the last of the late loaves leave your hands, the town has slipped fully into evening. Not silence medieval towns are almost never silent, but a softer order of sound. The loud bargaining of the market is gone. The carts now move with purpose rather than display. Voices come muffled through shutters instead of thrown across open air. Somewhere in the lane outside, a horse stamps and settles. Somewhere farther off, an alehouse door opens to spill a brief burst of talk and smoke, then closes again as if embarrassed by its own enthusiasm. Inside the bakehouse, the warmth has changed. Morning warmth is a command. Evening warmth is a reward. It sits in the bricks, in the soot-black rafters, in the wooden bench rubbed smooth by years of flour and labour. It rises from the cooling loaves on the rack and from the oven mouth, now less dragon than old hound, still alert but no longer trying to prove anything. Your body knows the difference at once. The day's labour still clings to your shoulders, your wrists, your lower back. But now it feels less like punishment and more like a tally honestly earned. You should be closing, properly, sensibly, with order, bread covered, tools stacked, embers judged, water set, morning planned. And yet the thought of one more place with benches, light, and something stronger than well water begins to glow in your mind with almost saintly appeal. The alehouse is not far. You tell yourself you're only stepping out for a little while, just enough to loosen the ache in your shoulders, warm your hands around a cup, hear what the town has made of the day's rumours, and perhaps take a bowl or a heel of something before returning to bank the bakehouse properly for night. This is, naturally, how all reasonable indulgences begin dressed as practicality. The dog lifts his head as soon as you reach for your cloak. No, you tell him. He rises anyway. The lane outside is cooler now, washed clean in patches by the earlier rain and still slick in the hollows. The sky above the roofs has gone from pewter to a deep, wet indigo, with only a faint pale seam lingering in the west. Smoke hangs low under the damp air, and torchlight or candlelight shows here and there through shutter cracks in warm little bars. You pull your cloak tighter and set off toward the square's edge, where the alehouse leans slightly into the lane as though listening for custom. Its sign creaks above the door, painted with a faded jug and what was perhaps once intended as a stag but now resembles a startled goat. No one seems troubled by this. Alehouses do not require artistic rigour. They require ale, benches, a hearth, and enough roof to keep weather from turning the drink into broth. This one possesses all four. You push through the door and warmth folds around you at once warmer than the lane, warmer even than the bakehouse in a different way, because this heat comes mixed with bodies, talk, stew, damp wool, yeast, onions, and spilled drink. The room glows in beeswax and tallow light. Shadows cling to the beams overhead. The rushes on the floor are fresh enough in places to smell green when trodden, old enough in others to remind you that cleanliness is often a matter of optimism. A fire moves in the hearth, benches line the walls, a long board stands beneath the windows, and another nearer the fire holds 3 carters, a widow from the lower lane, and a pair of men you recognise only as the sort who could argue over anything if ale assisted them. The alewife sees you and nods with the efficient tolerance of a woman who has served enough men to know which ones pay, which ones boast, and which ones sing without permission. "Baker," she says, "late bread gone." Late bread mostly survived the town. That was it? Only insofar as everyone remained hungry. She snorts and waves you toward a bench near the hearth. "Ollie." You hesitate just long enough to preserve appearances, a modest amount. "Then I shall bring a realistic one. That is another virtue of alehouses. No one wastes time dressing the truth. You settle onto the bench with a sound that would be embarrassing if the room were quieter. Heat from the hearth reaches your shins. The cloak steams faintly where rain damp still lingers at the hem. The dog, curse his loyalty, has followed you, and now curls beneath the bench as though tavern law names him among the fixtures. No one protests. A town dog with decent manners and poor prospects is welcome almost anywhere human leftovers exist. The ale arrives in a pottery mug, clouded, brown gold, and crowned with only the faintest foam. Small ale, likely, safe enough for the hour. With a sour bready edge you find immediately reassuring. It tastes of grain, yeast, wood smoke, and the gentle mercy of not being water. You take a longer swallow than dignity strictly requires, and feel it settle through you like a vote in favour of continuing to exist. Around you the room's conversations rise and cross. A carter near the hearth is explaining to no one in particular that the south road by the cracked shrine has always been cursed by drainage, not spirits, which is exactly the kind of practical certainty men develop after 3 cups of ale. A widow in a dark hood counters that bad drainage and bad spirits are not mutually exclusive. One of the arguing men insists that the abbey cart must have contained records of land rights. The other is still loyal to the relic theory because officials do not scowl the hard-over parchment. This is not strong evidence, but it has emotional force. You rest your mug in both hands and let the talk wash over you. Those who tell the tale never fully agree whether alehouses spread rumour or merely provided a hearth to sit beside. Likely both. A market begins the story, but an alehouse salts it properly. Here details are tasted, judged, improved, and sent back into the town with stronger legs than before. By tomorrow morning someone will swear the sealed chest at the abbey hummed in Greek and sweated oil through the wax. By next week it may well have cured a lame goat. A bowl appears before you, set down by the alewife with a heel of coarse bread beside it. Pottage again, thicker this time, with cabbage, onion, beans, and a scrap of pork fat making itself useful among the rest. You thank her with the little nod reserved for people who understand exactly how necessary they are. Then you eat. The first spoonful nearly undoes you. Not because it is refined. It is not. But because it is hot, salted correctly, and arrives after a day that began in darkness and never once loosened its grip until now. The cabbage has gone soft, the beans hold a little bite, the broth carries smoke from the hearth and sweetness from long-cooked onion. You tear the bread into it and watch it sink, swelling slowly like a little act of faith. Medieval comfort, you find, is very often a bowl. A familiar shadow falls across the bench. The suspicious monk stands there, damp hem dried now to a darker stiffness, hands folded into sleeves, expression exactly as unconvinced by merriment as ever. Yet here he is, which proves either human weakness or sound judgment. You too, you ask. The guest house is noisy, so you came where men lie for recreation. He lowers himself onto the bench opposite you with the caution of someone sitting in the moral vicinity of ale rather than fully inside it. They lie less musically here. The alewife brings him a cup without being asked. This suggests a history you would dearly like explained. He notices your look and says, "I am not vowed against ale." "No," you say, "only perhaps against cheer." He drinks. A small sip, but a real one. This is the most human thing he has done all day. For a while you eat in companionable not friendship while the room continues around you. A drover near the door laughs so hard he coughs. Someone in the back begins a song, wisely stops before the second line, and returns to drinking. The widow by the hearth tosses a bone to the dog, who receives it like a knight granted lands. Then the monk speaks quietly enough that only you hear. "It is a chest of charters," he says. You look up. "And one small reliquary," he adds, almost grudgingly, as though conceding a point to the universe. "Ah," you say, "so everyone is wrong and everyone is right. A very satisfying arrangement." "It concerns a boundary dispute and a chapel privilege," he says. "The reliquary is to remain in the abbey chapel during the hearings." "Which saint?" He hesitates. A fragment attributed to some Blaise. Throats. Then, you say, useful season for him. Saint Blaise, protector against ailments of the throat, is no poor choice for a damp town full of smoke, winter coughs, and men who think shouting over ale counts as medicine. No wonder the matter draws interest. A relic for devotion, charters for law, monks for order, reeves for argument, and perhaps manor guests for negotiation. Suddenly the steward's extra bread makes more sense. No one can quite agree whether the fragment is authentic, the monk says. That has not stopped anyone yet. No. That single word carries enough history to stock a library. You lean back on the bench and sip again from your mug, so the day's mystery settles, not into miracle exactly, but into the more common medieval braid of faith, law, property, and spectacle. A saint's fragment and a stack of parchment arriving in the same cart through rain and rumour, a boundary hearing perhaps, chapel rites perhaps, pilgrims already scenting devotion, officials already scenting jurisdiction, and somewhere in the middle. Bakers making more loaves because important men never conduct solemn disputes on empty stomachs. Even now, it is hard to tell whether bread serves politics or simply survives it, but it will be eaten just the same. The monk finishes his cup more quickly than you expected. There may be guests again tomorrow, he says. At the manor, and at the guest house. You sigh into your mug, St. Blaise protect us all. For the first time, the monk laughs. It is brief, reluctant, and gone almost before the fire catches it. But you hear it. The room does not collapse. The roof remains standing. Perhaps miracles truly do happen in alehouses after all. You finish your pottage slowly. The heat from it and the ale settles your bones. Around you, faces shine in hearthlight ruddy, tired, lined, ordinary. A carrier rubbing his wrists, a widow warming both hands around a cup, a drover half asleep over his board. This, too, is part of the town's nightly liturgy. Not bells, not chants, but benches, bowls, steam, and the soft letting down of labour among people who have earned the right not to stand for 1 hour. At last you rise. The bench protests. So do your knees. The alewife takes your empty bowl and mug and names a fair price. You pay, tug your cloak straight, and look toward the door where night waits in damp folds. The dog comes too, bone gone, loyalty undiminished. As you step back into the cold lane, the air feels sharper than before, but inside you now carry ale warmth, hearth smoke, the taste of cabbage and bread, and the small secret that tomorrow's town will wake not only to hunger, but to charters, a saint's relic, abbey guests, and all the bread that such holy bureaucracy requires. The lane outside the alehouse feels colder after the hearth. That is always the trick of warmth borrowed from company. It makes the night seem sharper when you step away from it. The damp air catches the skin of your face at once, and your breath rises pale before you. The town has thinned into its evening self now, not asleep, but turning inward. Shutters are fastened. Doors close more often than they open. Candlelight glows behind oiled cloth and horn panes in little amber squares. The earlier rain has left the stones slick and black, so that every torch and window shimmer stretches long across the lane like spilled gold shaken by your footsteps. You draw your cloak tighter and turn back toward the bakehouse. The dog follows with the slow, satisfied trot of one who has eaten beyond his moral station and sees no reason not to continue being welcomed by the world. Somewhere behind you the alehouse door opens again, spilling a fresh wave of laughter, cabbage steam, and song that does not quite become singing before the door closes and leaves the night to itself. Farther off, bells from the parish church mark the hour, quieter now, as though careful not to wake those already drifting into sleep. Evening bells are gentler creatures than dawn bells. They do not command, they gather. Your boots make a wet sound on the stones. Water still threads along the lower edges of the lane, carrying stray straw, a wilted cabbage leaf, and one unfortunate feather toward the drain by the wall. Above the roofs the clouds have broken just enough to show a scrap of moon, thin and pale as old bone. It lends the town no real brightness, only a faint permission for outlines. Chimneys, gables, the ridge of the wall, the high dark shape of the manor hall above the town, the lower, wider shadow of the abbey buildings beyond the market road, all of it held under the same wet night. At the bakehouse door you pause and listen before entering. No voices, no customers, no manor boy dispatched by panic. Good. You step inside, and at once the old familiar warmth reaches for you again, not the lively warmth of active baking now, but the lingering body heat of labour settled into brick and wood. The room smells of ash, flour, cooling crust, damp cloak, and that faint sweet sour note of leaven still resting beneath cloth. The rack holds only a few remaining loaves now, humble and late baked, enough for morning household use or your own table. The oven glows low within, embers reddening like coals beneath the skin of some sleeping beast. This is the quiet hour of the bakehouse, and perhaps the truest one. You set down your cloak, roll your shoulders once and begin the closing work. A baker's day does not end when the last loaf is sold. It ends when tomorrow has been invited in. You gather the tools first. The peel leaned against the wall, its long handle flour-smoothed and darkened from years of use. The iron rake, the willow brush, singed at the ends and fragrant with damp wood, bowls scraped, stacked, turned over to dry, cloths folded or hung where the remaining warmth can keep them from souring by morning. The bench brushed free of the day's flour, though not so thoroughly that it forgets what sort of place it is. Rushes stirred underfoot, old bits pushed aside, crumbs collected into a bowl for breakfast or dog diplomacy. The dog lifts his head hopefully at that last part. This is not a legal claim, you tell him. He thumps his tail once, which is not agreement but optimism. You kneel by the oven and take up the rake. The embers inside settle and brighten as you move them, their red deepening in the disturbed ash. There is skill even in this late work. Too many coals left close and the oven sulks hot through the night, wasting fuel and making the morning temperamental. Too few, and dawn begins like defeat. You draw some embers together, spread others, and feed in a little wood not enough for flame, only enough for endurance. Banking a fire is like negotiating with an aging lord. One must flatter it just enough to keep it cooperative by morning, but not so much that it grows extravagant. No one can quite agree whether an oven keeps heat better with ash mounded thick at the back or spread in a ring around the coals. Some swear by apple wood for a sweeter temper, some by oak for steadiness, some by adding a twist of dried rosemary on winter nights so the bakehouse smells less like a forge and more like a place fit for Christian bread. Even now, it is hard to tell whether such habits improve the fire or merely improve the baker's mood. But mood is no small thing in a tray that begins before sunrise. You add a scrap of rosemary anyway. The scent lifts briefly, warm and green against the darker smells of soot and brick. It mingles with the thyme the widow gave you, lying on the bench beside the onions. A poor room can still have pleasant corners if one is stubborn. Once the embers are banked, you lay the oven brush aside and move to the trough. There is still one last duty waiting there, quiet but essential, tomorrow's leaven. You uncover the crock and inspect it in the dim light, still alive, still fragrant with that sharp, yeasty life that means the invisible kingdom within it has not abandoned you. You stir it gently, feed it a little fresh flour and water, and mix until it loosens and thickens again to the proper feel beneath the spoon. This is one of the most peculiar forms of medieval inheritance keeping alive a ferment from yesterday for tomorrow, a domestic lineage of bubbles and sourness passed hand to hand, kitchen to bakehouse, season to season. Some swear an old leaven carries the soul of a household's bread within it, and that if you borrow starter from a neighbour too often, your loaves begin to resemble theirs in unfortunate moral ways. Others insist you must never give away all your leaven at once, lest prosperity leave with it. Those who tell the tale never fully agree, but nearly everyone who bakes keeps one or two rules around the leaven that no one laughs at after dark. You leave a cloth over the crock and tie it down lightly. Then the rest of the room asks for smaller acts. The onions are hung from a peg. The thyme is tied beside the herbs near the rafter where it will dry properly. Water is fetched from the bucket and poured into the basin for morning washing. A little stale crust is set aside. The last better loaf is wrapped and placed high, out of the dog's jurisdiction. The shutters are checked for gaps. One always has gaps. Medieval buildings are intimate with draughts. You stuff a little rag into the worst of one and consider that victory enough. Outside, the town has gone quieter still. Through the shutter crack you can see only a sliver of lane, silvered where moonlight and puddles meet. Once, twice, someone passes boots, a hem, a voice low in conversation, then gone. Farther off a horse snorts in its stable. A cart axle complains somewhere near the lower road. From the abbey comes the faintest murmur of chant carried strangely on the damp night air, then swallowed again by distance. The relic of Saint Blaise is there now, if the suspicious monk was truthful. Tucked perhaps into chapel shadow while parchments are unrolled and men with rings, seals, and opinions prepare to dispute over boundaries and privileges tomorrow. A saint for throats and a cartload of charters. Medieval life loves that combination heaven in one box, paperwork in another. You smile to yourself as you trim the candle wick. The little flame shortens, steadies, and lays a softer glow across the room. On the wall hang the iron key to the grain chest, the peel shadow long and thin, and your cloak steaming gently where the last damp has not yet fully left it. On the floor, the dog has arranged himself with full confidence near the warmest flagstone. His earlier bone from the alehouse lies gnawed to theory beside him. You sit at last on the bench by the wall. Only for a moment, you tell yourself. Only long enough to let the body remember it has joints and not merely hinges. You stretch your hands before the oven mouth and study them in the light flour caught still in the cracks, knuckles rough, one nail split at the edge, the backs reddened by heat and cold together. Baker's hands, not elegant, not soft, but useful in every meaningful way. There is pride in that, though quiet pride, the kind that never bothers announcing itself. Those who tell the tale never fully agree whether the close of day belongs more to relief or to preparation. You feel both at once, relief, because the loaves are baked, sold, carried, eaten, and no further boy from the manor is likely to appear tonight demanding miracles in crust form. Preparation, because dawn will come regardless, bells will sound regardless, hunger will wake regardless, and the bakehouse must be ready before all of them. In this room, ending and beginning are neighbours who share a wall. You rise again and take the broom, giving the floor one final pass. Ash dust, flour, crushed rushes, a few tiny crumbs, the day reduced to sweepings. There is nothing oddly satisfying in that, all that labour, all that heat, all the market noise and manor fuss and abbey mystery, and at the end of it the visible remains fit into a shallow pan. Even now, it is hard to tell whether that makes human work feel smaller or more noble. At last you dim the candle lower and stand in the near dark of the bakehouse. The oven breathes softly, the leaven rests, tools are in place. The room has settled into itself like an animal curled for sleep. Outside, beyond the shutter, the town lies under wet roofs and cooling stones, eating its suppers, saying its prayers, arguing quietly, coughing by hearths, nursing babies, mending harness, counting coins, and speaking of relics and charters in the half-believing tone people use when tomorrow promises something unusual. Inside, your own small world is ordered again. You lay a final crust near the dog, who opens one eye, accepts the gift without rising, and returns to his duties as guardian of crumbs and unofficial witness to all trade. Then you rest your hand for a moment on the edge of the warm oven arch, not quite a prayer, not quite the same little tap you gave it before dawn, but close enough to both that the difference hardly matters. The bakehouse is ready for morning, and in the soot-soft hush after labour, with the fire banked low and the town beyond the shutters folding deeper into night, you finish the closing tasks and leave the room breathing quietly in the dark, prepared for another day before the next bell has even thought to ring. The door closes behind you with a soft, final sound, and for a moment you stand in the lane without moving, as if the day has not quite finished releasing you yet. The air is colder now, properly cold, the kind that settles into the space between your shoulders and down into your hands if you leave them unguarded. You pull your cloak tighter, tucking your fingers into the folds, and look once along the narrow stretch of lane. It lies nearly empty, the stones dark with rain and moonlight, the puddles holding pale reflections that tremble when a faint wind moves across them. Somewhere farther down, a shutter clicks closed. Somewhere beyond that, a voice murmurs and fades. The town is not silent, but it has drawn itself inward, each household folding around its own small fire. You turn back toward the bakehouse and step inside once more, because there is always one last thing. There is always one last thing. The room greets you again, dim now, lit only by the small, steady glow from the banked oven, and the last careful breath of the candle you left behind. It is quieter than before, settled into that deep stillness that comes only when labour has been properly finished. The tools rest where you placed them. The trough stands clean enough to begin again. The leaven sleeps under its cloth, alive but patient. Even the air feels different, less worked, more waiting. You move softly, though there is no one to wake. Your bed is not far. A pallet of straw and wool laid in the loft above, reached by a narrow ladder that complains at each rung. Not comfortable by any generous measure, but dry, warm enough, and yours. You have slept in worse places, or so you tell yourself with the loyalty of habit. Some swear that a baker sleeps best near his oven, that the lingering warmth seeps into dreams and keeps nightmares at a respectful distance. Others insist that sleep is sleep wherever it falls. Those who tell the tale never fully agree, but most would accept warmth over philosophy given the choice. You pause at the foot of the ladder and listen once more. The oven shifts faintly, a soft settling of heat and brick. Outside, the distant bells mark another hour, slower now, spaced like careful breaths. A horse stamps. A door closes somewhere farther off. The town breathes, but gently, the kind of breathing that belongs to sleep, or to the edge of it. You climb. The ladder creaks beneath your weight, each step familiar, each rung worn just enough to fit your foot without thought. In the loft, the air is cooler than below, but not unpleasant. The roof above holds the night close, and through a narrow gap in the boards you can see a sliver of sky where the clouds have parted just enough to show a scatter of thin, distant stars, not bright, not many, but enough to remind you that the world extends far beyond ovens, markets, abbeys, and manor walls, even if most days you do not have the luxury of noticing. You lower yourself onto the pallet with a quiet sigh that seems to come from somewhere deeper than your lungs. Straw shifts beneath the wool blanket. It is not soft, exactly, but it gives where it must. And after a day like this, that is enough. You stretch your legs, flex your fingers once more, then let them rest. The ache in your shoulders settles into something almost companionable, the kind of tired that does not complain anymore, only exists. Below, the oven breathes. Above us, the night holds. Between the two, you lie in the small space carved out by your own labour. It has been a full day. Before sunrise, you stood in ashen darkness coaxing fire from what remained of yesterday. You mix flour and water and leaven by candlelight, listening to bells through mist. You watched the town wake. You fed the oven until it answered you. You shaped loaves for hands you will never see. You carried bread into the square where coins, gossip, hunger, and rumour met in equal measure. You listened as stories grew around a broken wheel and a covered cart, as monks doubted, as women believed, as boys embroidered truth into something brighter. You stood in rain beneath a gatehouse while the day decided what it meant. You returned to fire and made more bread because someone higher on the hill remembered, too late, that guests must eat. You sat by a hearth and shared pottage among those who'd also earned the right to sit. You closed the bakehouse with care enough that tomorrow will not begin in failure. And now, at last, you rest. The town beyond the walls continues without you for a few hours. Someone turns in their sleep. Someone wakes to tend a crying child. Someone keeps watch at a gate. Someone coughs. Someone prays. Someone dreams of fields, or roads, or a life with fewer mornings that begin in darkness. The abbey holds its quiet arguments over charters and relics. the manor prepares for guests who will speak of boundaries and privileges as though such things can be settled without bread. The market square lies empty now, its stones cooling, its voices gone, waiting for another dawn to fill it again. You do not need to follow any of it. For this short stretch of night, the world asks nothing of you. Even now, it is hard to tell whether that is the greatest luxury of all. You pull the blanket closer, turning slightly onto your side, finding the place where the straw yields just enough. The scent of the bakehouse drifts faintly upward, Ash. Flour. A ghost of warm crust, and settles around you like a memory already beginning to soften. Your breathing slows. The small sounds of the building, the creak of wood, the whisper of heat, the faint settling of something unseen blend together until they no longer stand apart. Those who tell the tale never fully agree what dreams come to a baker at night. Some say he dreams of endless loaves, rising and falling like tides. Some say he dreams of ovens that will not light, or dough that refuses his hands. Some say he dreams of nothing at all, because a day spent so fully in the body leaves little room for the mind to wander afterward. Perhaps all of these are true on different nights, under different weather, with different worries waiting at dawn. Tonight you feel only the slow, steady drift towards sleep. The bells mark another hour, distant now, almost kind. The stars beyond the roof beam hold their quiet places. The oven below settles deeper into its banked warmth, keeping just enough life for morning. The town breathes. The night folds. And you, at last, let go of the day. Sleep does not take you all at once. It comes first as a loosening, a slow untwining of the day from your limbs, while the loft holds you in its cool dark and the oven below continues its low red breathing like a heart that belongs partly to the house itself. Your eyes close, open once more, close again. Thoughts pass not in neat lines now, but in little fragments, the scrape of the rake over dawn ash, the smell of wet wool in the market, the suspicious monk's face when forced into honesty by ale, the manor boy clutching his rescued loaf like a holy object of a less official sort. The day softens around the edges. What felt urgent only hours ago now drifts into the strange, mild distance that belongs to things already lived. Below, a quiet crack sounds from the settling oven stones. Outside, the town has gone still enough that each small noise seems larger than it is. A horse shifts in a stall. Wind brushes once along the roof, far away, perhaps from the abbey, perhaps from a chapel nearer the wall. One late bell notes the hour and lets the sound fall slowly into the wet dark. Even the dog below, guardian of crumbs and unofficial clerk of the bakehouse, has surrendered at last to sleep. You imagine him curled on the warm flagstones, paws twitching in dreams of bones, sausages and institutional power. You lie still and listen, not because you must, but because this is the first hour all day when listening asks nothing in return. Then slowly, the town begins its secret turning toward tomorrow. Not outwardly, no doors open, no carts roll, no market voices swell. Yet the knowledge of morning is there already, folded into every sleeping room, water standing ready in pitchers, cloaks hung to dry, a pot banked near embers, a steward's plans half made, an abbey guest chamber with damp boots by the door, charters resting in their chest, the small reliquary of Saint Blaise somewhere in chapel dark, ringed perhaps by candle stubs, visited by one monk who believes and another who simply prefers not to be caught unbelieving, a widow with a loaf by her hearth, pilgrims asleep under borrowed blankets, the market square empty now, but not for long. Hunger is never late. And beneath you, the leaven waits. There is something almost tender in that thought. While the town sleeps, while manor and abbey and market and stable and lane all lie quiet under the same damp night, your little crock of living sourness rests under cloth, carrying tomorrow in its bubbles, flour and water, nothing noble, nothing jewelled, nothing fit for procession. Yet by dawn it will help become bread again, and through bread the town will rise into itself once more. No one can quite agree whether the true wonders of this world arrive in reliquaries, in sealed charters, or in the simple daily return of necessary things. Lying here in the dark above a warm oven, you suspect necessity is the greater miracle, if only because it never tires of coming back. Your body sinks deeper into the palate. The ache in your shoulders is no longer sharp. It has turned broad and dull and almost warm, like a memory settling into muscle. Your hands, rough and flour-marked even after washing, lie open against the blanket. The cold cannot quite reach you here. Not fully. Heat rises through the boards beneath, carrying the day's last kindness upward. Straw rustles softly when you shift. The wool blanket smells faintly of smoke, lanolin, and winter. It is not luxury. It is better. It is enough. Those who tell the tale never fully agree whether contentment is possible in a life this hard. Some say hard lives leave no room for it. Others say contentment lives only in hard lives, because softer ones forget to notice when a body is warm, when the roof holds, when the loaf is good, when the fire keeps until morning. You're too tired for philosophy, but not too tired to know this tonight. The bakehouse is ordered, the oven is banked, the leaven is fed, the town is fed a little too. And you're lying under a roof with your labour behind you and sleep arriving honestly. That is no small peace. Outside, the clouds thin a little more. Moonlight, faint and diluted, slips through the gap in the roof boards and lays a pale stripe across the loft floor. Dust glimmers in it. One rafter catches the light and lets it go. The rest stays in shadow. The town beyond remains invisible now, but you can imagine it, the wet stones of the lane, the wall dark against the fields, the abbey roofs silvered at their edges, the manor hall holding its own dim glow on the hill. Somewhere beyond all that, fields lie black and waiting. Mill wheels stand still. Forest tracks gleam faintly where puddles took the moon. Roads curve away toward shrines, villages, bridges, inns, monasteries, and all the unseen places from which grain, rumour, pilgrims, and trouble eventually arrive. And still you lie here, in this one small loft above this one working room, at the centre of your own modest kingdom of ash and crust. Tomorrow will not be easier. There will be bells before dawn and cold water and aching hands. There will be bread for labourers, bread for servants, bread for monks, bread for guests who discuss holy property with full mouths. There may be more travellers because of the relic, more gossip because of the charters, more urgency from the manor, more mud in the lane, more need than any one pair of hands should reasonably answer. But tomorrow is not here yet. It waits on the far side of sleep, softened by darkness, stripped of its demands for a little while longer. Your thoughts grow slower. The images that pass through them now are gentler. Not the rush of the market, but the steam rising from pottage. Not the heat of the oven mouth, but the low red glow after the fire is banked. Not the clang of commerce, but the sound of bells travelling through mist before sunrise. The whole day folds itself smaller and smaller, until it is no longer a long chain of tasks, but only a handful of warm impressions flower on your wrists, rosemary in the ash, bread crust cooling on wicker, candlelight on old wood, the smell of rain on stone, the dog's patient breathing near the hearth, and then even those begin to drift. So the final quiet comes. You rest in it. The bakehouse below is nearly dark now, but not cold. The town beyond is nearly silent now, but not empty. The night itself feels less like darkness than like a great wool cloak drawn softly over roofs, lanes, ovens, stables, shrines, and sleeping people alike. Nothing is lost in it. Everything is only covered for a few hours, kept safe from sight, from haste, from noise, from the sharp demands of daylight. The relic sleeps in its chapel. The charters sleep in their chest. The market sleeps in its square. The fire sleeps in ash. The dough sleeps in leaven, and you sleep above them all. One tired baker folded into the breathing dark. The bells will come again soon enough, but not yet, for now. The warmth beneath you holds. The blanket rests easily over your shoulders. The boards creak only once and then are still, and the last small thoughts in your mind loosen like flour from tired fingers. Your breath lengthens. Your body grows heavy and quiet. The medieval world, with all its cold roads, smoky halls, muddy markets, abbey rumours, iron keys, damp straw, saintly fragments, and endless loaves, recedes from the edges of thought and becomes only softness, only warmth, only a dim and steady hush. And at the very edge of sleep, where even the next bell cannot quite reach you, you drift at last into the dark, gentle shelter of night. The warmth remains, the darkness deepens, and the whole long day, from the first ash before sunrise to this final stillness above the oven, settles around you like a whispered blessing. Now the pace slows further. The night grows softer, less crowded with detail, and the town that has held you all day begins to blur into shapes of comfort rather than labour. The bakehouse is no longer a place of tasks and timing, but simply a warm body of brick and wood beneath you. The oven does not demand, it only glows. The leaven does not wait, it only rests. The bells no longer divide the hours with strict hands, they seem instead to float far away, gentle and harmless, like sounds heard through sleep before sleep has fully taken hold. You do not need to rise yet. You do not need to knead or carry or bargain or answer. There is no market square now, no manor request, no abbey dispute, no wet lane, no toll post, no suspicious monk with careful eyes. All of them have softened into the same dim hush. The relic may remain in its chapel, the charters in their chest, the guests in their beds, the carts in their sheds, and the horses in their stalls. Nothing asks anything more of you tonight. The wool blanket is warm across your shoulder. The straw beneath you has stopped rustling. Your hands are still. Your breathing falls into a slow and easy rhythm, and with each breath the edges of the world fade a little more stone. Timber, smoke, flower, moonlight, all growing gentler, quieter, farther away. The town itself seems to exhale and settle, as though every hearth has burned lower together, every voice has quieted together, every tired body has yielded to the same darkness. And in that darkness there is no fear, only rest, only the sense of being held for a while in a room above a warm oven, under an old roof, in a town that will wake again without needing you this very moment. You have done enough for one day, more than enough. The bread is baked, the fire is banked, the morning is prepared. Nothing has been forgotten that matters. So you let the last thoughts go. You let the bells drift away. You let the town recede into a soft black distance. And with the faint smell of ash and bread still lingering in the air, and the last patient warmth of the oven rising through the boards, You sink gently into sleep while the medieval night folds over you, quiet and deep and kind.